happens. But Jamarl, I'm guessing you were watching at least some of this. What did you think about it?
I thought Donald Trump showed that he owned the Republican Party and that the people who were dissenting were only a small band of people who were dissenting. That all things being equal, that party is Trump's. What did they take? The golden idol? And who didn't show up? Pence. I think Mitch McConnell. Did Mitch McConnell show up? I don't think he showed up, or maybe he did. But I guess the point I'm making is like the Liz Cheneys of the world, the Mitt Romneys of the world, they are in a very, very small minority. And that crowd seemed to be entirely on board for one Donald Trump. So
They did. They did. And it was interesting to me. There was a part during that speech where he was taking credit for reelecting various people, where, he was saying people he endorsed while he was president were overwhelmingly likely to win reelection, including, and he focused on Mitch McConnell, and he was like, I don't know if it was the right call. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if it was the right call to call for his reelection, but I did anyway. If Mitch McConnell were in that audience, I wonder what kinds of side eye he would be getting from the people sitting around him. But that's for later. We'll be talking about this, by the way, at 7:30 Eastern with Lee Stranahan, who attended the conference, who attended CPAC. We'll be coming back to that shortly. In New York on Saturday, Asian Americans and many supporters attended the Rise Up Against Anti-Asian Hate rally in Foley Square. The rally was held to protest a wave of attacks on Asian Americans, including a large number of elderly people. That rally was attended by New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, who told the crowd there were signs of a surge in violence at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. The rally was hosted by the Asian American Federation, an umbrella organization that advocates for better policies and services for Asian Americans. In international news, former CIA Director John Brennan called for President Biden to ban Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from the U.S. Brennan, who led the CIA from March 2013 to January 2017, said Biden must hold bin Salman accountable despite the strategic alliance between the two countries. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has stated that there are methods more effective than sanctions for the U.S. to implement against MBS. Psaki insisted that the U.S. still intends to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for the alleged involvement of the Crown Prince in Khashoggi's death, but did not delve into details of how that could be achieved. Fiancé of the murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has also called for Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince to be punished without delay over the killing of Khashoggi. Atis Sengiz, a Turkish academic researcher, made a plea that world leaders distance themselves from the Crown Prince and impose punishments such as sanctions on Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi was killed while visiting the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey in October 2018, and his body was dismembered. Security forces in Myanmar opened fire and made mass arrests Sunday as they sought to break up protests against the military seizure of power. A UN human rights official said it had credible information, quote unquote, that at least 18 people were killed and 30 were wounded. Confirming the deaths of protesters has been difficult amid the chaos and general lack of news from official sources. As of Saturday, 854 people had been arrested, charged, or sentenced, and 771 were being detained or sought for arrest. Washington has imposed sanctions on Myanmar because of the coup, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said it would, quote, impose further costs on those responsible, end quote, promising details in the coming days. We have already imposed Magnitsky-style sanctions on the head of Myanmar's military leadership, specifically Min Aung Hlaing, against whom we imposed those sanctions like a couple of years ago. I believe it was back in 2018. So I don't, unless we're going to extend those in some way or extend those to other members of the administration or do new types of sanctions, those are, as far as I can tell, those are the kinds of sanctions we would do anyway. Meanwhile, ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi was hit with another charge Monday. Suu Kyi appeared in a court hearing via video conference where she was charged under Myanmar's colonial-era penal code, prohibiting publishing information that, quote, may cause fear or alarm, end quote. This marks the third charge against Suu Kyi. Her next hearing is scheduled for March 15th. In other related news, Myanmar's UN ambassador Kyaw Mo Tun has been fired. The announcement was made a day after he urged the United Nations to use any means necessary, that's a quote, to reverse the February 1st military coup. We have a clip from him here. We have, I think, just about enough time to go to it. So let's play this clip before we close these headlines.
We need for the strongest possible action from the international community to immediately end the military coup, to stop oppressing the innocent people, to return the state power to the people, and to restore the democracy. We will continue to fight for a government which is of the people, by the people, for the people. The military coup is not acceptable in this modern world, and the coup must fail.
And that is the voice of Myanmar's UN Ambassador Kya Mo Tun. We need to go into a break. Those were our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a short minute with Jamarl's Soapbox segment, his monologue, and a short conversation about that. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. Also, subscribe. If you guys want to join in on the conversation, you can do that with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. A story took place that we didn't get the opportunity to cover, and didn't get the opportunity to cover as thoroughly as I would have wanted to. And what the Pentagon officials are calling a revenge strike for a rocket attack on February 15th that killed Filipino contractor with an American-led military coalition in northern Iraq. Joe Biden ordered airstrikes on facilities in Syria that he's claiming was used by Iranian-backed groups. Now, it should be noted, whereas Trump didn't alert the Iraqi government in the murder of Soleimani, the gradient of difference between the two parties shows that Biden was polite enough to notify the Iraqi government and launch the attacks in Syria, another country we're illegally occupying to avoid a diplomatic thicket with the government of Iraq. Let me repeat that. The people, Joe Biden, makes an attack. He calls the Iraqi prime minister, he gives him a heads up. Trump didn't do that. Trump attacked in Iraq in order to kill Soleimani. Biden, even though the people he wanted to kill were Iraqis, he waited till they got to Syria because he didn't want to create a diplomatic problem with Iraq in that very specific situation. However, Syria, we're already illegally occupied. I want to get back on the thicket with Iraq a little bit later, though. This violation of Syrian sovereignty was lauded by CNN as a message to Iran with a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. That was their quote. That was their headline. Those 7 500-pound bomb scalpels killed 22 people, and despite it being a message to Iran, everyone killed were Iraqis. The Independent is reporting, quote, Iran provided financial, military, and political support for powerful, often highly ideologically motivated Iraqi armed groups that are often rooted in similar strains of populist Shia Islam as the leadership of Tehran. This part, the group, officially called Popular Mobilization Forces, have grown more politically powerful since taking up a fighting role in the 5-year war to dislodge ISIS from Iraq and Syria. So wait a minute. They're talking about this kind of in general terms, not in specific terms of the group that was bombed. And more importantly, this group that we bombed and killed were fighting ISIS in Iraq and Syria. This group was fighting to evict the terrorists from the country. And from their point of view, all of the people that were there that were not supposed to be there were terrorists, including us from their point of view. We're not supposed to be there. Russia and Iran are allies of the Syrian government. After getting 500,000 people killed in a failed attempt to take down Assad, basically using terrorists as a battering ram, we then stole their oil, we burned their crops in order to precipitate a shortage of energy and food, and a continued effort to overthrow the government by basically putting stress on the population. There were even situations where you had members backed by the CIA, terrorists backed by the CIA, fighting terrorists backed by the Pentagon. This is what was taking place. We spent $1 billion. For what international law is worth, and you've often heard me say that international law doesn't exist, I often say it for explicit reasons like this. It only applies to small states that can't necessarily defend themselves. Otherwise, it's the law of the jungle. The weak must bear what they must. The strong will do what they will. Mary Ellen O'Connell, a research professor of international dispute resolution at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, told the Associated Press, quote, "The United Nations Charter makes it absolutely clear that the use of military force on territory of a foreign sovereign state is lawful only in response to an armed attack on the defending state of which the target state is responsible. None of those elements is met in the Syria strike." That's right. None of those elements are met. But yeah, who cares about legal, right? The United Nations has no power, and the ICC only goes after African nations or African dictators. We're in Syria illegally right now, and Iraq doesn't want us there, and we stay nonetheless. I am not the only one questioning the illegality of this, or, for that matter, the legal basis of being in Syria. Jen Psaki, Biden's press secretary, this was back in 2017. She says, also, what is the legal authority for strikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. That's right, Jen. Syria is a sovereign country. I agree with Biden's press secretary 1,000% there. She's going to have an interesting time answering and showing the distinction in the press conference that's going to come up today when they ask her about that tweet. Mainstream media rarely hits this point about whether or not this stuff is illegal. They slobber over images and sound bites. No one has a sound bite of the guy dying as a result of the bomb. A few points. We are in a country that we invaded on the basis of a lie over 20 years ago. The strikes weren't for an imminent threat to the United States. They were basically retaliatory. Whether they hit the right people or not probably was less important. They probably targeted a group. Syria never attacked us, and yet we're attacking Syria to avoid a diplomatic snafu with Iraq. Yet, and still, everybody killed were Iraqis. This also accentuates the fact that we're illegally occupying Syria with zero legitimate basis or reason to be there. As far as I can tell, we're still bastardizing that notion of using the authorization of military force in Iraq, the thing that Trump was using, the thing that Obama was using, based on Iraq. They're stretching all notions of illegality. And the most interesting one is the New York Times. The New York Times writes a headline, U.S. airstrikes in Syria target Iran-backed militias that rocketed American troops in Iraq. Now, that is a very strong headline, and the majority of people walking away would think that they understand something, that they get it. It's pretty self-contained. Iran is backing groups, and America is targeting those groups that Iran is backing that shot and killed American troops. And then when you scroll down to 8 paragraphs later, it says, quote, little is known about the group, including whether it's backed by Iran or related to organizations that use the facilities the American strikes targeted on Thursday. Let me repeat that. The headline, Iran-backed militias. 8 paragraphs later, little is known about the group, including whether it's backed by Iran. But they wanted to get that very specific American point of view headline in. And who needs to ask for legal? The term legal was not even in the document. Right here. I'll just read it out. Little is known about the group, including whether it's backed by Iran or related to organizations that use the facilities for American airstrikes targeted on Thursday. Some American officials contend that the group is merely a front for better-known Shia militias. So Biden gets his first killing. He kills 22 Iraqis in a bid to apparently show Iran, give Iran a message. And we find out that not only are they 22 Iraqis, that we don't even know if the group is backed by Iran. This is starting already. Joe Biden has just got into office. Joe Biden hasn't even given out the $2,000 checks that he promised to the country. Donald Trump is at CPAC right now, and the Republicans have basically taken, or Trump has basically taken, the Republican Party. If you thought Trumpism was going away, it is not. Which means that if you screw around and lose the Senate and lose the House, the next Republican that comes in will be Trumpian. And not only Trumpian, a more competent Trump with a Republican Party that is already taken. This, at this point, is up to you and the Democratic Party and what you do and whether or not you put up a competent, viable alternative to what is brewing, terrifyingly brewing, in the Republican Party that doesn't see that failed putsch attempt as being bad, problematic, or wrong at the very least. And what does that tell you about the next Republican that takes office? For a group that doesn't see that putsch attempt as being bad, wrong, in the least, and will have numbers to make that work the very next time. Joe Biden has basically killed 22 Iraqis in a bid to send a message to Iran. And in killing those 22 Iraqis, send that message to Iran, we're not even sure that they're affiliated with Iran, despite every headline that's coming out will breathlessly say Iran. None of them will add that context into the headline, or at least not most of them. They would probably put that thing at the very bottom. And the question of legality that should be there is not there. Congress was not asked. And at this point, the president, 3 of the last presidents have blown off Congress entirely. Shane, what do you think about this? Joe Biden's first killing. We didn't get the opportunity to talk about this on last week.
We did a bit. We did
a bit.
We did
Yeah.
talk to a guest about it, which was our oversight. But yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying to Biden and the Democrats, you need to meaningfully disentangle yourselves from Trump's policy, which would be funny. It's funny to say because it seems like that's all they're casting themselves as doing, is zigging where Trump was zagging. You know, whatever he does, they try to do the opposite, that kind of thing. But when it comes to foreign policy, they seem pretty darn identical. Being too chummy with the Saudis, with the Saudi monarch, and bombing Syria, continuing to bomb the Middle East. That's like the last 4 presidents in a row, something like that. We have done that consistently, both of those things. And the events of the past week show that we're still doing that. Now, while Trump showed some signs of trying to move away from those trends, he didn't. And Biden, as far as I can tell, even though he was hitting back on Saudi Arabia during the debates, and even though he's asking to talk to Mohammed bin Salman's dad instead of the leader, the de facto leader himself, those are more nominal. We're not seriously severing our ties with Saudi Arabia, as we'll come back to, because we're so dependent on them in the region. And we've got, decades-long history of relationship with the whole petrodollar arrangement, and, them selling gold in US dollars and then reinvesting those dollars into the American economy and what's known as petrodollar recycling. There's that legacy. There's also the military facts on the ground, where the weird tacit half alliance that Israel and the Saudis have isn't going anywhere. I don't think either party wants that to go anywhere. And of course, they need the United States as the third and most important peg in that somewhat stable stool they have set up. So I don't see any of this changing. But and furthermore, I don't see the presidential trend changing. I don't see Biden or future Democrats, until something hits the fan and things radically shift in our political alignments over there. I don't see anything changing about what we're doing. Until we formally pull out of Syria, pull out of Iraq, pull out of Afghanistan, and stop, trying to beat down Iran's door, I don't see the strike stopping. And I don't see, unless something similar happens on a scale of magnitude like that with the Saudis, I don't see us pulling away from our relationship with the Saudis. That's my take there. What's yours, Jamarl?
I don't see us pulling away with the Saudis either. I mean, Joe Biden started that off as if he was going to do something different or be something different on that front. And honestly, it seems like slap on the wrist at best. I mean, it's like you're putting out the theater that you're going to do something. And then when it comes around to it, not so much. I mean, Magnitsky sanctions, for example. I mean, think about the way we were able to use those and attack Russia with those sanctions, as opposed to MBS, who basically deboned the guy and basically ran a war that we keep saying that we don't particularly like or don't want to be involved in. And yet, here we are. Yeah, it seems like theater. It honestly does. I mean, the question becomes, does Joe Biden do something that we're not necessarily thinking of? Or does he have something hatched up that is taking place on a more subtle level? I don't know. I can only go by what we're seeing. And it doesn't necessarily seem that there's going to be any kind of real penalty for Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that Joe Biden was acting as if there was going to be a penalty for Saudi Arabia. I mean, for God's sake, he called the guy's dad. But look, it doesn't seem to be making a difference. So, you guys are listening to Fault Lines. We're going to be right back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking CPAC, at which Trump made his first public debut since basically the events of January 6th, since he was taken off of Twitter, since he was pushed out of the limelight. He has come back to center stage, on the stage at CPAC. He closed out the talks that weekend last night, Sunday night, and as far as I can tell, and we'll get into this in just a second, he seems to have the leadership of the Republican Party. This was at least Stranahan, our next guest, was telling us he thought would be the case when he joined us on Friday. We have him back on the other side of the weekend. Lee was attending CPAC in Orlando, Florida. Lee Stranahan, for those listening, is a Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, airing Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And he's with us now. Lee, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. By the way, here's something unusual. And this is maybe too much information for Jamarl, but okay. So I've known Shane quite some time. In fact, since Jamarl, launched him to this small planet. And Shane, I'm going to ask you something about me. And I'm being 100% serious. As long as you've known me, have you ever once in your life heard me say this phrase or the equivalent, I'm sunburned? Have you ever heard me be sunburned in my whole life?
No, I have not. No.
It's kind of weird if you think about it. And that's because I don't like taking my shirt off and out in the sun. I will tell you, at 55 years of age, I am sunburned. I got too much sun laying out with my shirt off by the pool.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And it's kind of weird, and I actually kind of like it. I told Jamarl, I said it.
That's not too much information for me, man. Look, I want you to enjoy yourself. It's raining, freezing here, but as long as you're happy, I'm good. That warms my heart.
I went out this morning. It was 73 degrees. Jamarl.
Are you serious?
73 degrees when I went out and got my coffee this morning.
Oh.
So there we go.
That's painful.
Yeah.
That's painful to hear.
That's my CPAC report. Thank you very much. Good night.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're sunburned. You're a little bit. I'm sure you're a little bit exhausted. All right, let's get into Trump. I've got a clip here. This hits on one of the things that we were talking about on Friday, and this is what's taking a lot of the news across the nation when they're covering his speech. He is not planning on starting his own party, but in addition to that, you can hear in this speech, Trump is addressing the party. In other parts of his address last night, he's talking about, he's effectively conveying he is the leader of the party. He wants to support Republican candidates. His endorsement is gold, that kind of thing. Let's play this clip, Andre.
Integrity and election reform immediately. Republicans should be the party of honest elections that can give everyone confidence in the future of our country. Without honest elections, who has confidence? Who has confidence?
It seems like this may be the wrong clip.
And examined.
It seems like this may be the wrong clip. basically
Well,
he is
let me,
saying, go for it.
well, no, I was just going to say I can riff on that clip while you guys find the other one. But let me give you the top down picture here. I rated this speech, and again, the way I'm rating it is on the terms of Trump and the Trump base. Does that make sense? That's if you rate a Bernie Sanders speech, you should do it based on what a Sanders supporter would want, right? So I rated this a solid B, very possibly a B plus. This was a very good speech by Trump, and it was a very good speech. And I'll talk about why it's not perfect in a second, but it's a very good speech. First off, he did stay on message, and the message was a good one. First off, you mentioned the big thing. The media was putting out a lot of conjecture that he might start a new party. He shot that down first thing. He said, "I'm not starting a new party." He mocked the idea. He said he's not going to do it. Okay, he got that out of the way within the first 5 minutes. Then he pivoted to issues, and he went over them issue by issue. Now, the reason I say it's a B plus is some of the issues, and I'll come back to this, and I can come back to this later if you want me to. But I think the mistake he made, I think he needs to stop talking about issues that he doesn't have solutions for. I'll give one quick example: the Paris climate accords. Right? They don't have an alternative. He doesn't want to be in them, but he doesn't have an alternative. So my advice, since he's not running for president, because he also made that clear, he might be running for president after 2022. But right now he wants Republicans to win back the House in 2022, which is what I suggested on Friday, you remember. And thankfully he took my advice. He's a big listener of the show, obviously. And he heard what I was saying, but this is smart. He's not running for 2024. He doesn't need to talk about Paris now. He can talk about the issues that he does have. And what you're pointing out there, the election reform issue, got one of the biggest responses of the whole speech. People want election reform. And he didn't just yap about it and didn't just complain about it. They've got specific proposals on the issue of big tech censorship. Partially because of Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, they've got specific proposals. And I cannot emphasize this enough on a number of these key issues. And I mentioned two of them, election reform and big tech censorship, and there were others. They had specific proposals for the way to solve them. Now, the reason it's not perfect to me is he doesn't have a short marketing hook. He doesn't have the DeSantis proposal to solve tech, skullduggery, or well, that's a bad name, but you get the idea. And they need to take a lesson from marketing, because he's back at, look, this is Trump back in his element. He's the marketer in chief, right? He doesn't have to run the day-to-day. He can go out and push an agenda and push candidates, and he really does seem to be listening. So I think Democrats and establishment Republicans would really be doing themselves, and I don't care, feel free if you fit into one of those categories. Anybody underestimating Trump, I'll tell you the other issue is immigration, where he was very specific. Anybody underestimating Trump, he has his finger mostly on the pulse of the voters. The parts that he doesn't have his finger solidly on, they're willing to go along with him. And he was disciplined, upbeat. He did dance to YMCA by the Village People at the end. People like that and find it funny, and they really do. They enjoy that aspect of Trump. So Trump, the candidate, the full-time candidate, not running anything, is back. And I think anybody underestimating the potential political power he has in 2022 and in 2024 is making a mistake. So this is my first little riff on that.
Yeah, I guess I can agree with you on this, believe it or not. Look, Trump was clearly the favorite. He clearly dominated. The people who were, let's say, against him, let's say the moderates, if you want to call them the moderates in this case, you can say the corporate Republicans, if I would say all of them are corporate Republicans on some level, but they didn't show up, and they didn't have the numbers. And Trump was able to stand there castigating those other Republicans. Just think about that. I mean, think of the sea change. You had what? Trump was the only Republican out of like 20 Republicans that he beat. All of them were basically establishment Republicans. And then you turn around and now the entire party is basically Trump. How do you see that? Like, why do you think that this changed so drastically within the course of like 10 years? I mean, what is it that Trump is bringing to the Republican Party that the Republican Party felt like they didn't have and that they needed to get their hands on? What is it about Trump that does it for these guys?
Okay, so on a personal note, and this relates to my answer on this, it's been 9 years since we lost my friend Andrew Breitbart. It's 9 years ago that Andrew Breitbart's death was announced. I believe he died before midnight. So technically, yesterday's the anniversary, but today's the day it was announced to the public. And the reason I mention this is Andrew, although he didn't see Trump, saw this, and it's through the Tea Party. And this is important to understand. What we're seeing here, Jamarl, and it's the same thing we saw with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I'm not saying he's a ghost in that sense, but a descendant. Let me use a more live word. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are both descendants of 2007 and 2008 in the financial crisis. Sanders is the heir to the Occupy Wall Street movement. Okay? Trump is the heir to the Tea Party movement. But both of those movements, the Tea Party and Occupy, were reactions to exactly the same initial stimulus. If you got a group of Tea Party people and a group of Occupy people, and you asked them how they felt about any number of issues, abortion or healthcare, fistfights would break out. But if you ask them how they felt about Fed, right, the bong would be passed around, right? Everybody would be mellow and throwing back beers and yes, brother, right? Because on certain issues, the Federal Reserve, the election system, whether we're getting screwed by elites on Wall Street, we all agree. I'm going to say that again. We all agree on those issues, even on stuff, think about it, like regime change wars, okay? Neither side is quite as consistent as I would like, but both really broadly agree that regime change wars suck. Let me just put it like that they're bad, right? And you can see that. It's the libertarian impulse on the right, and it's the libertarian, the long-term left libertarian Murray Rothbard SDS influence on the left. They're anti-war, right? This is going back to the 60s. This is where the unity is. And so both Sanders and Trump are really political heirs and descendants of that movement. And that's what we're seeing, the resonances of that movement. And it hasn't gone away because Wall Street is as powerful as ever. Regime change wars are as popular as ever with the establishment. And everybody, left and right, in that, grouping doesn't trust the establishment.
I 100% hear you, and I 100% agree. I want to come back to this. We only have a couple of minutes on this side of the break, and I want to get to another clip. But I'm still, after January 6th, I hear what you're saying completely, and I'll admit I was wrong about this. I thought Trump as a political figure was as close to dead as you're going to get because of what happened on January 6th, but he has come back to life. In my eyes, almost miraculously, because what happened on January 6th is unprecedented in American history and like the most serious and severe political event that we faced in many decades at this point when it comes to, domestic civil uprisings in the belly of the beast when it comes to politics. But let's get back into this for just a minute. We're talking about Trump as the leader of the Republican Party. And we have this in our next clip. This is the second clip, Andre. On Trumpism, where Trump is talking about, this new term Trumpism. And to me, you can hear this for yourselves. It sounds like he is talking pretty simply, not just about Trump's policies per se, but about where the Republican Party's policies are these days. They sound pretty identical to me. But Andre, let's play this clip.
The new party. Many people have asked, what is Trumpism? A new term being used more and more. I'm hearing that term more and more. I didn't come up with it. It means low taxes and eliminating job-killing regulations, Trumpism. It means strong borders. It means no riots in the streets. It means law enforcement. It means very strong protection for the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. It means support for the forgotten men and women who have been taken advantage of for so many years, and they were doing great. And it means a strong...
It got cut slightly early, but to me, basically all of that sounds like Republican Party policy talking points. We've got a little bit of time before we need to go into a break here. Lee, what do you think?
The first two, taxes and less regulations, that's standard Republican rhetoric, for 60 years, whatever, 100, whatever, a million years. Once he starts getting into stuff like immigration, you've got to remember the Republican Party was pro illegal immigration. They would not come out. The reason Trump stood out on immigration is because groups like the Chamber of Commerce that were very big in the Republican Party and people like Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, and so on there was not a whit of difference between them and Democrats. In fact, that's what the Gang of Eight was about. The Gang of Eight was a unity thing between establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans. And although the rhetoric was a little different, the people on the left talked a little bit more about human rights, but they didn't really mean it. And the people on the right talked a little bit more about freedom and jobs and everything, but they didn't really mean it. Everybody saw through. I mean, everybody on the other side of this issue really saw through it. So that's where he starts again. I don't think Trump completely understands Trumpism. I'll just be honest. Some of it is standard Republican, but I'll tell you, he's been under such a pressure cooker for 4 years and having to govern like I say, Joe Biden wakes up every day. He's got to look at the world situation. He's handed memos and everything else. Trump rolls over and looks at Melania, and then he can go back to sleep if he wants to, right? You see what I'm saying? And that's a very different state of mind to be in because he can campaign. And unquestionably, think about it, he is really a tireless campaigner. Again, good, bad, like him or don't like him. The dude is the Bruce Springsteen of campaigners. He does long rallies the way Springsteen used to do 3-hour concerts. I know Bruce is having an aneurysm or a shot right now hearing that, but it's really true in a very real and meaningful sense. He's a tireless East Coast campaigner. And now
doing
he's
that while he was president. Again, and it has continued the campaign rallies, which many in the mainstream media had lamented and mocked during Trump's campaign. He continued doing them right through his presidency. Admittedly, a bit slowed, but he got right back into them. So I see what you're saying. We need to go into a break. We're joined by Lee Stranahan, and we'll be back with him on the other side of this break. He's a Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, airing Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this short break in just a minute.
Fault lines. Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking Trump and the future of the Republican Party. This as CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, closes. It was based in Orlando, Florida there. That was also where our Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, Lee Stranahan, was based over the weekend, starting last week. For those listening, we continue to be joined by Lee. He is a Sputnik News analyst, host of The Backstory. That show airs Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Lee, as I was saying before we went on into the break, I was wrong about Trump. I thought after January 6th, he was closer to 6 feet under than, politically, than pretty much any candidate I'd seen in a long time, because it's not necessarily about the impeachment, the second impeachment, although that was the first for a president. Technicalities aside, the fact that he wasn't sitting, that was the first time a president had come under impeachment a second time. Nevertheless, it did not work. It was the fact that he had presided over this thing. And even if he did not incite his followers to violence on January 6th, he nevertheless was speaking the same day of the event. He was closely tied in public opinion to the event. And it was an event unlike any other in American history. It was a bad day in really deep ways and in the long term for American democracy. And not Trump's fault, but it's left D.C., it's left a capital area surrounded by barbed wire and National Guards troops on the ground. We're a lot closer to martial law. So I don't like the event itself. I certainly don't like most elements of our government's response to it. But either way, he was the one who was tied most closely to what happened on January 6th. Why do you think I got that wrong? Why do you think he has staying power? Is it like you were saying, he's a legacy of the Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party movement, of the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and since that those crises haven't yet really been addressed, the cause that brought him to power is still in place, and he's still going to have longevity because of that. Is it because of his personal resilience? What's your take, Lee?
Okay, your problem here, Shane, and Jamarl, I would include you in this category, is that you're reasonable human beings. So imagine it's January 7th, and we're all high Democratic Party officials, and we have a little meeting, and I say, guys, we had this big, we could call it a riot, but, certainly people went into the Capitol building who weren't asked. I've got an idea here. Here's my plan, guys. Let's overplay our hand. What do you say? Let's try to make this worse than it actually was. And then let's put forward legislation we'll never be able to pass and completely overplay our hand here. Who's in favor? Neither way, both you guys would have raised your hand. Everybody in the audience would have said, wait, slow down. We've got a winner here, right? We just won yesterday. This is not good. And I'm like, no, slow down. Let's say that a cop, and you're like, well, a cop is dead and it's bad. I know that's not enough. Let's say he was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. And you're like, no, wait, he's dead. That's very bad. So, it's not bad. And no. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to pitch it on every media outlet and on and on. Let's call it an insurrection. And you're like, well, let's censure him. I think we can censure him. No. Let's impeach him. Let's keep pushing this. You see what I'm getting at here? At every turn, the Democratic Party and the Republican Trump haters overplayed their hand, and they had a winning hand. When you've got a winning hand, just leave well enough alone. But it's sort of against human nature, right? People have the tendency to push things, right? They can't settle for what they have. They've got to push it. They can't just go, let's let this win. So they did push the story, for instance, that a cop was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. Then when that turned out to not be true, and it took a couple weeks for it to come out that it wasn't true. The New York Times, instead of saying, we made a mistake, here's how our journalism went wrong, they just pulled the story, right? When it was clear that the numbers had settled and they weren't going to possibly get an impeachment, they said, screw it, let's do it anyway. You see what I'm saying? They really could have had a censure. They really could have. People would have gone for that, but they had to push it. And what happened was the Republican base and the Trump base can see that. They're not dumb. They can see that. Now, some people on the left, it's not that they're dumb. They're in a bubble. So there are people out there, I guarantee you, there are people out there who don't listen to conservative media. But by the way, there's no question about this. That cop was not killed. And it's horrible that he died, in my opinion. But he wasn't beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. And people who are in the right-wing media at all know that, because Tucker Carlson's talked about it, and because the New York Times, rather than do the reasonable thing and explain their error, just buried the story. You see what I'm getting at? So in other words, they took a winning hand and made it a loser, right? They took four kings, let's say, as a winning hand, and they said, let's throw away some of those kings and try for aces. And guess what? It backfired them. That's really my take, is that it was not as bad as even the term insurrection is really iffy, in my opinion. And by the way, I'm not trying to defend this. I'm saying I think the safer thing to do politically would have been to underplay it, but the Democratic Party just can't help them. And by the way, sometimes the Republicans can't help themselves. But in this case, the Democrats couldn't help themselves.
I don't think.
I hear what you go for it, Jamarl.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think I'm in a bubble on this. I don't listen to the Democrats' talking points on this stuff. My opinion was based on just this notion. And by the way, my opinion didn't take into account them beating the cop to death. Meaning, I didn't need that to postulate for me saying that Donald Trump should be impeached. Whether they could get the censure, probably. Whether it rose to the level of impeachment, I would say definitely. And I don't think that's just a Democrat thing. I mean, you had several Republicans that were leaving as a result of the city on a hill being ransacked. I mean, you don't think that there's any credible argument to make that what took place was a result of Donald Trump's actions and that trying to throw over the table is beyond the pale? Like, I mean, go ahead.
Let me answer that. I think whatever, they weren't going to win. It was 100% clear that they were not going to get the numbers. So at that point, you got a choice. You know you're not going to possibly win on the numbers. They did not have the numbers for impeachment. It was very clear. So at that point, what do? Do you go for a noble loss? Do you say, well, we're right and we're going to lose? Or do you modify your position and then go, we're going to get a win out of this. We're going to get a censure out of this. We're going to get something. Because as it stands, Shane, you correctly pointed out, and historically, it is accurate to say he is the first president to be impeached twice. It is also accurate to say, and it's just factually true, he's the first president to be impeached twice and to beat both, to not be impeached twice. You see what I'm saying? So you've got at a certain point. It's this idea that the perfect is the enemy of the good. They could have had a clean win on the censure, a clean win. Instead, they got another, I would argue, loss. Now you can argue it's noble, and you can make a case for that, but you can't argue it's not a loss. They did not get the impeachment, and that's my point. That point is inarguable. So if the term adults in the room means anything other than I now qualify for a discount at Denny's, which I do. I've proven that. There's a Denny's right down the street. If adult means, sort of more mature and thoughtful, which applies or doesn't apply to me depending. But if that's what it means, they didn't take that. And it certainly applies to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They know how to count. And they knew that they were going to lose, but they decided to go for the noble loss. So that's my view on that, Jamarl.
That makes sense.
All right, we've only got a few minutes. One of the big things you were saying last Friday, just on the other side of this weekend, before Trump was due to speak, was the sort of, if you had to give him a tip, if you were his advisor or whatever, if you were looking at this from a Republican point of view and you wanted to bolster Trump and bolster the Republican Party and bolster his flavor of republicanism, you were saying he needed to make it about the 2022 midterms and about electing Republican governors, senators, representatives, etc. He did focus on that from the beginning to the end. It was interspersed there. Largely, the speech was anti-Biden and establishing himself, but he did focus on that. In your opinion, did he focus on that enough? If you were looking at him as his advisor, whether you tell it to him or not, did he do a good enough job at making clear that going into 2022, that's where a lot of his attention was going to be focused, not just on his personal reelection, but on electing more Trumpian Republican senators, etc. Lee, what's your take?
Yeah, no, I think he did do that. I think he did it very well. The only tweaks I would make, and I'm not hearing anybody else. This is me sort of speaking as a political consultant, which I am occasionally. Where I would tweak it is play the 80-20 rule. Get rid of the stuff you don't have solutions for. The base doesn't like the Paris Climate Change Accords, but you don't have a proposal, shut up about it. Just focus. Keep things tighter. You know what I'm saying? All killer, no filler. Just keep it to the things like election reform, like big tech reform, like immigration, that you've actually got practical solutions. Because here's the thing, and the other thing I would say is reach out to reasonable Democrats and independents who voted Democrat more. And the way you do that is with specific proposals. As soon as you start not having specific proposals, your listeners, they can tell that you don't actually, okay, so you're going to get rid of the Paris Accords. What are you going to do about it? And the answer is bupkis. You got nothing on that. So shut up about it. Just go to the thing that you can say, here's what we're going to do about big tech censorship. And let the listener go, hey, these guys have a lot of really good ideas, and appeal to them that way. I wish he'd done that a little bit more, but that's a tweak. It's not a harsh criticism. And I'm really trying to judge him just fairly. How do you appeal to more voters? I think he's onto something. I really do.
Okay, interesting take. We're out of time. It seems like Trump has effectively consolidated his leadership of the Republican Party. A lot of people were wondering if he would be doing that during this event. And from this conversation, as well as watching his speech, I think he has. We're out of time. That was the voice of Lee Stranahan, Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, airing Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. Here in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, at least 1,129 new coronavirus deaths and 50,925 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 67,868 cases per day. That is a decrease of 29% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 28,622,900 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and more than 513,000 have died. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has received a coronavirus jab as the country opened its vaccination program for a wider population. He was administered the jab of Covaxin, an indigenously developed vaccine. India launched its vaccination drive on January 16th, but it was limited to healthcare workers and frontline staff. Now, people over 60 and those who are between 45 and 59 but have other illnesses can get vaccinated. This Saturday, the Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, a single-shot vaccine with lower efficacy and lower costs than most of the shots available on the market. Along with the continued manufacture and rollout of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, this means that the United States could be finished vaccinating priority groups by the end of the month, with vaccinations for the general public in full swing by April. The thing that gets me is the less efficacy. That's the part that is jostling a bit. But the numbers are going down, and that's good.
It is 66%. That's the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson one-shotter.
Yeah.
66%, which is significantly lower than like the 90 plus percent we've seen on other vaccines. But it's a single shot, and it's cheaper. And I think having that's the other thing. The perfect is the enemy of the good, in my opinion. Leave it up to the individual and leave it up to public health officials in either case to determine what's a best fit for what. But if you can get most of the population vaccinated with high efficacy vaccines, and then you leave some people with lower efficacy vaccines, I would take either. I would do the Johnson & Johnson one if that's going to help. I'm not in a super high risk category.
Yeah.
I'm just like in a moderately low risk category. And so I'd be perfectly satisfied with that if that's what's available and I can get it sooner. And
we're right there.
That's my take on that.
If you're a person who is relatively healthy and you don't think you're going to die from COVID, I think this is fine. If you know what I mean? Like, it's a risk assessment that I think people go by on stuff like this. And so, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with them putting this out. I guess it depends on who's getting hit with it. And look, we've had doctors on before that said the 90% efficacy is mind-blowing. Like, the regular vaccines that they typically put out don't have anywhere near 90% efficacy. So, it's funny, our perspective of this has been somewhat jaded by the new technology of the mRNA vaccines. Very, very strange. I mean, on some level, that's a positive, right? They're able to get vaccines done faster with new technology that allows those things to be replicated with a high accuracy or high efficacy. Have
you seen this came out, I believe it was on Friday. This was another thing that came out over the weekend, I believe. about the drive to cure malaria, to to fully immunize against malaria with mRNA technology, like the first vaccine to fully immunize against malaria. Malaria is a killer. If you look at Bill Gates, who a lot of people criticize for a variety of reasons. Anyway, Bill Gates, one of his main pushes, one of his main philanthropic drives is like eradicating malaria around the world. And usually this gets done whether it's bed nets, where you basically have bug nets that keep people from getting keep people from getting bit with by malaria-carrying mosquitoes while they sleep, whether it's that or whether it's anti-malarials, whether it's drugs that can be used to treat it. If you can fully immunize against that in one fell swoop, if you can start the delivery of that around the world, you face the prospect of eliminating malaria in the same way that we have eliminated polio, broadly speaking, which is crazy. So I just throwing that in there. You were talking about the revolutionary side of mRNA.
Well, they were talking about it as a way of dealing with, seizures or something like that. I mean, they are, at this point, looking around for stuff that they can cure with this new technology. And it's not just these malaria. I mean, they're talking about like autoimmune diseases that they can try to cure. I mean, this is phenomenal. I mean, keep in mind, kidney failure was thought to be an autoimmune disease. And so if they catch that when the kid is, I don't know, let's say 8, would they be able to cure it before the kid develops end-stage renal failure at 17? Talking about myself. You know what I mean? Like, it's a big deal. Like, the stuff that they could potentially use for this technology is pretty phenomenal. So, I'm enamored by this on some level. I don't take the flu vaccine, right? Because it comes across to me as like, well, I don't know if that works. And for all I know, you could just be trying to find a profit-making enterprise at my expense. Can I still get the cold? Yes. So you mean, wait, I'm taking the vaccine, I can still get the flu? Yes. So why am I taking this vaccine? Well, it can protect you from some flus. But how do I know that's working? You don't. You have to trust. Trust the profit motive. Trust the invisible hand. I don't. But the mRNA thing is different. To me, that's just different. And what they could use is for the applications for it just seemed prodigious. So, I mean, this is one of those things we have to wait on, I suppose. And we will have doctors on to discuss it. But, yeah, I don't have an issue with this. More research, the better. I'm one of those people who are pro-science, almost as an absolute. The House approved a massive $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, advancing President Joe Biden's top agenda item and providing more resources to schools and businesses, boosting funding for vaccinations and testing, and grant financial relief to Americans across the country. Democrats passed the measure early Saturday morning. The American Rescue Plan will provide 1,400 stimulus checks to millions of Americans across the country and extend federal unemployment benefits through the summer. It would also provide millions of Americans, provide hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to state and local governments, school and vaccines, and COVID-19 testing efforts, in addition to nutritional and child care assistance. Senate Democrats are racing to finalize a new tax provision that would penalize large companies that pay low wages. This move comes after the Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough ruled Thursday night that a $15 minimum wage hike cannot be included in the Senate COVID relief package. I'm sorry for screwing up that name. I screwed up the name because I was jumping ahead in my thoughts about the $15 wage hike can't be done by the Senate. The answer and the reality of it is, yes, it can. The parliamentarian doesn't have the final say in that. The 51 vote, Kamala Harris, has the final say in that. Meaning if Democrats really wanted to push that through, they don't have to listen to the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian couldn't stop them from doing it. If Joe Biden is serious about the $15 minimum wage, this jury-rigging by trying to penalize large companies, go through the real process and override that parliamentarian and put that in the Senate, get the mansions of the world online and do your job for the American public. Joe Biden was out there hugging a woman saying, in Houston, Texas, at a food bank. And my thing was, you're the president of the United States at a food bank. She doesn't want your hug. She wants the $2,000 you promised her, so she wouldn't be at that food bank. She wants the $15 an hour minimum wage, so the job that she's working, if indeed she's working a job, when she's paid that wage, she no longer has to be at that food bank, so you can harass her there. I am saying that the goal and the responsibilities of the president go beyond the hug. Your powers make that hug unnecessary if you ensure that that woman has the supplies and resources she needs to not be at that food bank. Do your job. That's my point. You told people you're going to give them $2,000, give them the $2,000. You told people you're going to get a public option, get that public option done. You told people you're going to give them $15 an hour, give them the $15 an hour. Do your job. Period. Full stop. In a press release issued Sunday, and by the way, I want to give Biden credit on one thing, but again, this could be theatrics. Biden comes out with a video, I think it was last night, and he basically making an argument that I am for unions, 1,000% for unions. No companies should get in the way of people trying to form unions. That is against what we want. He was very clear. He was very articulate on the issue. And of course, this is being directed on some level at Amazon. Amazon was making videos basically attacking the idea that though people should form a union in Georgia. It's like you have people saying, yeah, unions are horrible. Unions just take your money. Unions just do this. Unions do that. It's an attack on the people in Georgia who's trying to form the union at the Amazon Center. Joe Biden comes out in favor of the unions. The question is, are you going to do anything politically about it to help those people form that unions and prevent those companies from going after those people or firing those people when they do try to form those unions? It's not just the words of the president, even though the words of the president matters. The bully pulpit matters. It also, however, what you do. What you do is more important. That gives a much larger statement as to what you believe. Let's keep going. In a press release issued Sunday, responding to claims of sexual harassment by a second former aide, Governor Andrew Cuomo says he was being playful, quote unquote, on those two words, being playful, but he said he may have been insensitive, quote unquote, may have been insensitive. He states, quote, I have never intended to offend anyone or cause any harm. I spend most of my life at work, and colleagues are often also personal friends. And sometimes I think I'm being playful and make jokes, and I think I'm being funny. I do, on occasion, tease people on what I think is in a good nature way. The governor denied that he touched anybody and, quote, never propositioned anybody, unquote, which contradicts the claims made by former aide Lindsey Boland, who alleged that he touched her and forcibly kissed her on the lips. Cuomo also asked State Attorney General Letitia James to choose the interviewer to probe the sexual harassment allegations against him. Beth Garvey, special counsel and senior advisor to Cuomo, said in a statement Saturday that Cuomo, quote, has requested an independent review and all staff will cooperate in that endeavor. Former Judge Barbara Jones will lead the review, unquote. President Biden backs an independent review of sexual harassment claims against Governor Andrew Cuomo, with his press secretary, Jen Psaki, voicing that the president believes, quote, every woman should be heard. Andre, before we get to the clip, though, I want you to notice something. Initially, this went from, I'm not guilty of this, I deny all of this, to a moving in position. It's a sliding in position. He's changed spots. He couldn't hold his position. And now it's, well, at times I think I'm being playful and making jokes that are funny. I do occasionally tease people in a good-natured way. I never intended to harm anybody. I spend most of my life at work, and colleagues often are personal friends. I'm making the point that he is backing away from the original, I didn't do anything wrong, to, well, maybe people saw my actions as being unintentionally flirtatious. Let's play the clip of Jen talking about Cuomo. Basically, Biden is going to go through with the federal investigation.
Well, first, President Biden has been consistent that he believes that every woman should be heard, should be treated with respect and with dignity. Charlotte should be treated with respect and dignity. So should Lindsay. And there should be an independent review looking into these allegations. And that's certainly something he supports and we believe should move forward as quickly as possible.
Well, Biden is basically throwing Cuomo overboard. But to be honest, what could he have said? I mean, what could Biden have said on this? The most that he could have said was nothing. But I got to be honest, it gets pretty loud at the point where all of these people are coming out against Cuomo. And you know, Shane, you made a good point. The grandma slang that Cuomo was engaged in apparently is now secondary to the salacious claim of sexual assault. How does that work? The killing of grandmas should matter far more than the sexual assault stuff. Both should be simultaneously problematic for Cuomo, and yet it seems one is taking the lead. Why?
Well, one way to look at this, has Cuomo publicly called for an outside investigation into the nursing home incident into the deaths of thousands of people?
No, he hasn't, but the federal government is going to look into that one.
They are, and we'll see what they find. But you see what I'm saying? He didn't do this with one, he did it with the other. And in my opinion, that's unfortunate, but hey, maybe that's just politics.
So, that the reason why
it's Chinatown, Jamarl. That's my point. Anyway.
That's grim. That's grim. That's cynical and grim. That's a little more cynical than you're used to, Shane. I think I might be rubbing off on you with this stuff. All right, let's get one more in. In an address on Sunday at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando, his first public appearance since he left the White House, former President Donald Trump denied he had any plans to found a new political party, branding it as fake news. He also called for unity of the GIP while naming Republicans who supported him and calling out the quote-unquote rhinos who did not. Trump on Sunday night also denied that he was watching live television coverage of the deadly Capitol Hill riot. In response to accusations that he was watching it all unfold, he condemned the siege but called the outrage surrounding it a double standard. Donald Trump called Tuberville. He accidentally ended up talking to, what is the other gentleman's name? I can't think of the other gentleman's name. But
McCarthy?
Well, he called McCarthy once and got into a screaming match with McCarthy. But he called another person, and that person gave him Tuberville's number. I can't think of his name. He'll come to me. He was told that Mike Pence was in danger, and Mike Pence was being rushed out of it. That did not stay Donald Trump's hand. I'm making the point that people were telling him, Trump, do something. He just wouldn't do it. So Donald Trump calling it a double standard and everything here, talking about he wasn't watching the riot. Whatever. And I know people have different definitions on this double standard and everything else. The idea that McConnell would get there and say Donald Trump was morally and practically responsible is a damning indictment coming from Mitch McConnell, despite the fact that he chose not to impeach or not to convict. Let's do this. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So the story that we followed on this particular channel, even though the other channels haven't necessarily paid attention to it in mainstream media, or at the very least not as much attention has been given to it as it should be given to it. Louis DeJoy is the Trumpian businessman that was endowed with the powers of the 76th U.S. Postmaster General. Now, instead of working in the interests of America, or for that matter, the best interests of the Postal Service itself, DeJoy seemed to be on a crusade to fulfill the Republicans' want to destroy and privatize the post office by crippling America's service, post office, by crippling the ability to do its job. Now, this was made worse by the scandalous actions taken to assist Donald Trump in the election, again, by undermining the post office's ability to do its job, in this case, to deliver ballots. DeJoy was slammed last year by a federal judge making changes to the post office that served to significantly undermine the post office under the guise of modernizing. The judge said DeJoy turned the post office into, quote, a tool of partisan politics, unquote, with the purpose of voter disenfranchisement. Rolling Stones recounts DeJoy calls, quote, delays in the removal of high-speed mail sorting equipment, particularly in swing states in advance of the November elections. In September, a federal judge wrote that, quote, the Postal Service actions are not the result of any legitimate business concerns, unquote, and appeared instead an intentional effort in line with the Trump administration's partisan goal of disrupting and challenging the legitimacy of the upcoming local, state, and federal elections. Now, what is Joe Biden going to do? A Democrat is in office. Is Joe Biden going to do anything about it? The White House moved towards reasserting control. This is the Washington Post. The White House moved towards reasserting control of the U.S. Postal Service on Wednesday, even as Republican Postmaster General defiantly told Congress that he would press forward with his plans to raise prices and slow the mail. Biden has named 2 Democrats and a voting right advocate to fill 3 of the 4 openings for the Postmaster Governing Board. This will basically allow the toppling of DeJoy. Will Joe Biden do it? And is DeJoy on his last legs? And honestly, DeJoy should be on his last legs. If Democrats care anything about maintaining any sort of democratic control of anything, including the post office and the Postal Service, you will get rid of DeJoy. Joining us to have this conversation is Chuck Zlatkin, Legislative and Political Director for New York Metro Area Postal Union, APWU. Chuck, I said to myself, and I think I even said it to the team, this is going to be the one day that Chuck may come on that he may actually be happy with something that has taken place regarding the Postal Service. Joe Biden adding the additional names, I think it's 3, to the governing board will give them the ability to get rid of DeJoy. Do you think they're going to do it? What do you think, Chuck? And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I guess, yes, there was some happiness with the appointments, but, what's transpired recently at the congressional hearing, at the public hearing of the Postal Board of Governors on February 9th, it's still very disconcerting. And also, again, understand that the 2 of the Democrats that sit on the Postal Board of Governors were up until these recent 3 appointments were all Trump appointees, and the sitting postal governors, they were the ones who chose DeJoy to be the postmaster, and have remained silent with no criticism whatsoever of anything that DeJoy implemented that had a grave impact on the mail. I mean, yes, it is true that COVID was something that had to be dealt with, and the increase in package mail was there. But the institution of slowing down the mail that DeJoy put in took place under the Postal Board of Governors, including the 2 Democrats. Now, on February 9th, at the public hearing of the Postal Board of Governors, they voted for their new chair. And they voted Ron A. Bloom to be the chair. Now, Bloom is in his holdover year. His term has been completed. They can stay an extra year if the president allows them to. So Biden could have put in 3 and a 4th to replace Bloom. And Bloom is a big supporter of DeJoy. And I don't know how many people bother to watch that hearing, but if you watched it, you would see that he's in total support of DeJoy's program. Now, DeJoy has been talking about a 10-year plan that he's coming out, that it's going to revolutionize the Postal Service and protect it and save it and all this stuff, but he still hasn't made it public. Interestingly enough, in putting together this 10-year plan, he neither spoke to the unions nor the mailers. They were excluded from putting together this plan.
Well, yeah, if you're going to screw those organizations over, the last thing you want to do is, bring them in on it.
Right.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that Democrats are complicit in this? Meaning, Democrats were complicit in, passing the bill that allowed for one, the post office to have to cover all of those things like 75 years out. There was that. And that was because you guys had apparently a budget surplus one year. Well, that budget surplus could have been used and invested in order to modernize the post office and all this other stuff. It didn't have to be used in that almost a punitive fashion for a surplus. But on top of that, do you think that the Democrats are somewhat complicit in allowing these changes to undermine the post office that would basically end up privatizing the post office? Because the people who are putting money in Republican pockets are similar and putting money in Democrat pockets. It's just that politically positioning, Democrats aren't supposed to be reflexively against the post office in this way. But political positioning aside, that could be theater. What's the reality of it from your standpoint and from where you're looking at this?
Well, I would say that always some Democrats, you have to figure out how many and who they are. But there have always been Democrats who've gone along with the privatizations and serving now. So Ron A. Bloom is a Democrat, but he worked for the Obama administration. But this guy is a fixer. He was in there dealing with, quote, saving the steel industry and saving the auto industry. In both cases, it was a situation where there had to be sacrifice from the workers and the customers, and to some extent maybe management as well. But those, while they were important to this country and it meant a lot of jobs, they were both profit-making businesses that had stockholders and people who were looking to get return on their investments. That's not the Postal Service. Trying to apply the same standards to the Postal Service is really just a means of getting to the point of privatizing. So what they're talking about doing, what's leaked out from DeJoy's 10-year plan, which Bloom is excited about, is the fact that it's going to basically eliminate first-class mail from traveling on planes, which would mean that it will delay the mail. First-class letter mail on a plane, to L.A. is going to get there very quickly. First-class mail on trucks with the rest of the mail is going to take slower. Also understand that for many years, DeJoy and his wife are owners and heavy investors in companies that were used by the Postal Service to truck mail. So more trucks is more money for DeJoy. But
are they, just to be clear, are they introducing this as a cost-cutting measure? I mean, from like you're saying, this is a rumored release from that report, but this is a leak. Is that what it would be about, Chuck?
Well, it's cost-cutting and making it more efficient under the names of efficiency. But when you cost cut and then you're forcing customers to go elsewhere, you're really not cost cutting, you're revenue cutting. And that's when you look at what they're doing and who these people are, privatization is part of their goal. And again, as I said before, maybe even with you guys, is that 91% approval rating for postal employees in the Postal Service comes from the fact that we're reliable and we do the service. It's not because we're nice people and we dress well.
And by the way, it's inexpensive, reliable. You're there to do the job. And by the way, you're a service. The state, the government pays for that service. It's not a business. It's not a private business. The goal of it is not to be a private business. The goal is not to make profit and everything else. The goal is to do a job. And if sending mail first class is required to do that job, then sending mail first class is required to do that job. We just pay for the service. Like, this is not a logic that we use for these kind of private companies and everything else. This is something that is for the people and the public of the United States. And the public loves the mail service. One point, it seems that the goal is to cripple the post office without letting people know you're in fact crippling the post office to tarnish the image of it enough where it's not 91% of the people that like it, but it's that number goes down. And when that number goes down enough, the question is going to come up, hey, maybe a private company can do this better. That's been Republican dogma for God knows how long. And I guess I'm getting to the point where it seems like maybe it's also Democrat dogma. They just aren't saying. What do you think, Chuck? You have about 30 seconds.
Exactly. DeJoy, a Republican operative donor, Bloom, a Democrat, operative. They're both working hand in glove together to improve, destroy the Postal Service, because they're both in stalking horses for privatization and enemies of not only just postal workers, but the American people who depend upon a free, open, public postal service.
Chuck, I really appreciate you coming on as we've covered the story. And look, you're right. If Democrats care anything about the Postal Service, which they should, it's a valuable industry in this country that the country loves. DeJoy should be fired. And honestly, it should be fired on principle alone. The voice that you guys were listening to is Chuck Zlatkin, Legislative and Political Director for the New York Metro Area Postal Union, APWU. You guys can keep up with Chuck and his work with the NYAPU on Twitter at Chuck Zlatkin. Also, you can catch him here on Fault Lines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking Joseph Biden, U.S. President Joe Biden, as well as Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. After this last week, Biden threatened harsher action against the Crown Prince, and has, by many accounts at least, failed to deliver on that. Not sanctioning the leader himself, sanctioning some 70 associates of his, and sanctioning the former deputy intelligence chief, who is supposed to have been the ringleader specifically of the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, who was brutally dismembered in Istanbul, Turkey. His remains were never found. A dissident Saudi journalist killed overseas, and a green card holder in the United States. Again, many were calling on Biden to do more, including former CIA chief John Brennan, who has called for President Biden to ban Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from the U.S. I'll just point out, we were talking about this during headlines. This comes last week, in the same week that the United States, under Biden, has executed his first airstrike in Syria. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but I'm just pointing that out. These two foreign policy moves on the Middle East happening at about the same time. To talk about what's going on here, to talk about the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia, why we're pulling away to the extent that we are, but not further, and that both of those will be an interesting conversation. We are joined by Laith Marouf. Laith Marouf, for those listening, is an award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. Laith, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Great. Thank you for having me once more.
Thank you for being with us. Let's talk about this. First of all, do you think this was enough for Biden? Why do you think he didn't do more? What's your take on this generally, on the sanctioning and lack thereof, the sanctioning of Saudi Arabian officials and the non-sanctioning of Mohammed bin Salman himself?
Look, this is a shakedown of Saudi establishment in a different manner than what Trump did. Trump was blunt, saying, if I'm not here within 12 hours, these states would not exist. Here is Biden coming to for bin Salman and telling him, if you don't pay up, I'm going to accuse you of crimes and such forth. The reality is the establishment in Saudi is not independent. It's just a vessel. It cannot do anything without the permission of the United States. And that's really what's happening.
Well, it does seem that the U.S. has a certain degree of soft power within the country itself. I mean, my thing was, Joe Biden put all the optics up of talking to the king. Basically, the world considers MBS as being the leader of the country, but he decides to talk to the king, talks to his dad. I thought that gave out somewhat of a theatrical show. And I thought it's possible that the conversation with his dad was get your kid in line or get somebody else in that office. But it doesn't seem like that. It seemed like it might have been this kind of theatrical push. He released the information, but the question becomes, what real results come of this? You think it's a shakedown. Yeah. Are you sure that it's not a rebalancing of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States? I mean, is that too far to go with that?
There's nothing that Saudi family can do without the permission of the United States. And so there is no realignment of any relationship. There is a slap on the hand specifically for the MBS and Netanyahu revolt against Obama at the end of his term, and their attempt to, and their success in collapsing the Arab Autumn Muslim Brotherhood campaign that bin Laden and Biden led. So the reality is on the ground right now is the United States needs, just like it needs apartheid Israel, and there's a limit to what criticism Biden will put forward of Netanyahu, because they know the United States cannot project its power on Western Asia without the help of and the existence of the colonial project of apartheid Israel. They also know that if the Saud family collapses, then the whole Arab Peninsula would be liberated in a few minutes by Republican and Democratic forces and unitary forces in the Arabic world. So there can be a slap on the hand. There can be a show just to pretend that the United States cares for human rights and such, but this will not change anything. And it's very important that our listeners know that Khashoggi is not a good guy. I mean, yes, he is a journalist, but he was advocating openly for the chopping of heads in Syria, supporting the Wahhabi death squads that ripped apart Syria and Iraq. And, he, at the end of his life, a little bit criticized some of the, not even criticized, they diverted away a little bit from the positions of the Saud family and the Wahhabi cult that they fondle. And this is his end. So in a way, he got chopped up like the people that he advocated for the chopping up of.
I mean, I don't like any of it, though. I mean, that it's a brutal way to be killed, and I don't think that's turnabout. I don't think that that's fair play. A sensible ally in the region, without anybody, even weird bedfellows that they would be, without anybody to back them up, other than the United States itself. Am I wrong in that? What's your take, Laith?
Yes, I mean, the core issue is American imperialism. If the United States wants to continue to be an imperial power that controls regions that are 4,000 kilometers away from it, then it has no choice but to make deals with vassals that are dictators and butchers and colonizers and ethnic cleansers like apartheid Israel and Saudi occupied Arabia. So that's the core problem. So as long as the United States does not want to allow the Arab people to unify and to become more advanced and on the international stage equal to others, then it will continuously need the services of butchers and colonizers.
So I can accept that Jamal Khashoggi was something different in regards to Saudi Arabia as opposed to the American audience, meaning from our standpoint and from the Washington Post standpoint. He was one of their journalists that was covering Saudi Arabia with a certain degree of, let's say, scathing skepticism that they didn't particularly like. So the report basically comes out and says that nobody else in that government would have the power. Right here, we assess that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved an operation in Istanbul to capture or kill Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the report executive summary states. We base this assessment on the Crown Prince's control of decision-making in the kingdom, direct involvement of a key advisor and members of Mohammed bin Salman's protective detail in the operation, and the Crown Prince's support of using violent measures to silence dissidents abroad, including Khashoggi, the report says. Even if Khashoggi, let's say, was that guy, from the U.S. point of view, and honestly, from the Washington Post point of view, the MBS basically had their person deboned, chopped up, and in a brutal fashion with his wife or girlfriend, fiance, standing outside. Even if you believe that he was the person that you say is, which he might have been, after reports of that, it doesn't really matter from the standpoint of the U.S. response. The U.S. doesn't really take those reports. So anything that Biden is doing and everything else has to take into account that this guy was basically killed. And we often say that other governments around the world that do stuff like that is problematic. And yet, here we are with a report that is intentionally, completely blaming MBS. Now, if Biden is not changing the relationship with MBS, why does this report come out? Do you get my point? It seems like there is something that he wants to do differently than the previous administration. Yes. Now, to what it matters, yes, meaning in regards to gradient of difference, I don't know if it matters at all. But it does seem like there's a difference here, especially even in the saying, look, this guy is guilty of this particular crime from our governmental perspective. I mean, what do you think that affects, or do you think it affects anything? It's just theater.
Yeah, look, nobody deserves the death that Khashoggi was meted, and definitely nobody deserves the death that Khashoggi wished on the soldiers of the Syrian army, and he shared, videos of ISIS chopping up the heads of Syrian soldiers and saying that this is perfect propaganda to weaken the will of the Syrian people openly in his tweets. Obviously,
no, I agree with you. I wouldn't defend. Those are horrible things for him to say. And we were on this channel very against the United States bombing of Syria, even this particular bombing of Syria. I think I did a monologue on it today. So it's not that. So Khashoggi had pretty detestable points of view.
It's clear at the end of his life, Khashoggi, flipped his allegiance from the Saudi Wahhabi alliance to the Turkish Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood alliance, and began criticizing them. And so you see, these are the two axes that are within the imperial order in West Africa, West Asia, and that are competing on who's going to be the house slave that meets the punishment on the other slaves in the region on behalf of American imperialism. And for that, he was killed. And now Biden and before him Obama, who were allied with the Muslim Brotherhood Turkish alliance to take over the Middle East on behalf of them, are trying to make MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, pay for that, not in a way that could collapse the alliance between them and the United States, and or maybe MBS is going to revolt. They don't want that. So they're just putting him on notice, and they're shaking him down for more money and more backing down on what the United States wants for his country and the region.
I mean, and the United States has said they will not sanction a foreign leader directly. I also can't help but wonder, if we were to try to impose Magnitsky-style sanctions, targeted personal sanctions against key officials, if we were to start freezing their assets, it would be the most strident case, I think, made so far that the United States is unreliable as a safe harbor for foreign investments, where a lot of other, you can look at Saudi Arabia, specifically through their sales of oil. They produced a bunch of oil, and then they exchanged that oil for dollars effectively, and then they reinvested those dollars in various specific companies, as well as in the U.S. stock market and in T-bills and bonds in the U.S. They've used the export of oil basically to purchase a share of the American economy, and this is broadly matched in what many other leaders of other foreign countries and many other higher officials in other foreign countries do as well. They reinvest a lot of the money they make from whatever they do into the U.S. If we were to do a Magnitsky-style sanction on those individuals, I can't help but think that the United States would appear a much less safe harbor for foreign money. And I mean, it is one reason to criticize that style of sanctions in general. but I can't help but think that's another part of this. Does that play into it all? It's not just geopolitics; it's also the nature of foreign investments. Like,
yes, I mean, that's true, but also we have to admit that these despots in the Gulf don't really control their money in the banks of the United States. They're made forced to put their money in those places, and they have no control really of what they're doing. That's above and beyond the fact that the oil trade with the Arabs has been the modern day bead trade with the indigenous people. You know, oil is cheaper than water, although it's the most important product in the world. Plus, add to that the actual despots of the Gulf countries receive only around 10% of the revenues. The rest goes to American oil companies and Western oil companies. And then from that 10% that they receive, they're made to invest it all in Western economies and have no control over what it is. And then they're only allowed to spend their money in these exuberant ways that make them look even more so of a stereotype of a backward Arab.
Well, there is an ostentation. We're out of time here. Laith Marouf, thank you for joining us. The voice you were listening to is award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant, Laith Marouf. You're also listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We're going into a break. We'll be back in a short minute with our next guest, John Kiriakou. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So another story we've been covering has to do with the airstrikes. Joe Biden first mass killings, basically. Joe Biden ordered airstrikes on facilities in Syria, the border of Syria and Iraq, that he claimed was used by a group backed by Iranian-backed militia groups, or used by Iranian-backed militia groups. It has to be noted that the attack was for a revenge killing in February 15 missile attack that killed a Filipino contractor with American-led military coalition in northern Iraq. It also has to be noted that this attack took place in Syria in order to avoid political complications with Iraq itself. Now, Trump didn't care about those complications when he murdered Soleimani. Joe Biden apparently did, hence the attack took place in Syria. Yes, we are illegally occupying Syria, but that illegal occupation is different than our alliance with Iraq. What also should be noted is that there were 22 people that were killed. All of them were Iraqis. The New York Times comes out with an amazing article stating, very big bold letters in the header, U.S. airstrikes in Syria target Iran-backed militias that rocketed American troops in Iraq. This will be breathlessly repeated over and over and over again in many headlines. But 8 paragraphs down is the reality of this. When asked about what we know about the groups and everything else, the New York Times writes the following. We're right here. Come on, there we are. So New York Times writes this, that basically the retaliatory strikes, little is known about the group, including whether it is backed by Iran or related to the organizations that use the facilities the American airstrikes targeted on Thursday. Some group officials contend that the group is merely a front for one of the better-known Shia militias. The point that I'm trying to make here is 8 paragraphs below the header that is very clear in defining this group as being backed by Iran. They very clearly state little is known about the group, including whether or not it is backed by Iran. Joining us to have this conversation is John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou is a former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, and author of the books including The CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis and The Reluctant Spy. John, welcome back. I know we got you back early, but this was right up your alley considering you wrote the book on Iran. Thank you for joining us, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I am enamored by this. The New York Times reports basically stenographers telling, what they've been told. This group was backed by Iran. We did this missile strike because this group, et cetera, attacked us. Well, you find little is known about the group, including whether it's backed by Iran. And there's also a question to ask whether this is legal and what is the device, the legal device that Joe Biden is basing this attack on. Iran, Syria didn't attack us directly, and yet here we are attacking that country once again. And as far as I know, Joe Biden didn't get congressional approval to make this attack. What are your thoughts?
Right. It's clearly not legal. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but this has become something of a mantra for me. There are only three ways in which we can attack another country or attack people in another country legally. That is with the permission of that country, with an invitation. That is if that country has attacked us, or with the approval of the United Nations Security Council. And we didn't have any of those three. So this was a violation of international law, clearly illegal. Secondly, this is one of those off-the-shelf attacks, and I don't mean to downplay it. 22 people dead is monstrous. But when I say off-the-shelf attacks, I mean there are attack plans that we have just sort of sitting at the ready. So if we feel there's some sort of political gain to bombing someone, but not provoking a war with another country, we pull one of those plans off the shelf, we bomb them, and then we go along our merry way. That's what this was. We attacked an individual Shia militia, and we got political mileage out of it. This is a Shia militia that may support Iran. We don't really know. This is a Shia militia that may support the Syrian government. They probably do. And they can't fight us back. Now, politically, I think this was a terrible mistake for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're trying, at least we're supposed to be trying right now, to bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table so that we can re-enter the JCPOA. And secondly, we've just very simply chosen the wrong side on Syria. Here we are actually in bed with Al-Qaeda, where you have the CIA funding and training Al-Qaeda. And I'm not saying an Al-Qaeda-like group. I'm saying actual Al-Qaeda that just changed its name to the Nusra Front. The truth is, and I said this on the show last week, Jamarl, that the only thing standing between the Christian community in Syria and total annihilation is Bashar al-Assad. And so as distasteful as that might be to us, we ought to be at the negotiating table with Bashar al-Assad.
That would be good. That would be a big step forward, not just for the region, but of course for our relationship with pretty much every country in the region. I want to come back to this for a minute. You said that this is a disastrous political move. It seems like Biden is stuck in the middle of the road. On the one hand, trying to make sure that we come across as hard to Iran for mainly the American intelligence community's sake, and many members of the Republican and Democratic parties. He's trying to make a show politically. At the same time, we're trying to engage in some process, however laggingly or haltingly, of renegotiating the JCPOA and going through that process. And these as political agendas push obviously opposite one another. Am I again, the way I'm painting this, at least the way I'm seeing this, is Joe Biden is trying to do one while he does the other. He's trying to have his cake and eat it too politically on this issue, and necessarily it's going to fail. Where am I wrong in that, John?
You're not. You're exactly right. One of the mistakes that people like you and I make are that when we have a new president, we assume and we want for that president to immediately seek diplomacy. It's a new administration. Let's re-engage with the Iranians. Let's get diplomacy moving. And real life is different. Real life is in slow motion. Real life is in order to negotiate from a position of strength, we have to show how tough we are. We have to show that we're willing to use force when we believe it's necessary. And so there's not going to be a quick re-engagement with the Iranians. Now, the Iranians are going to have to make their own calculations. The Iranians are going to have to think to themselves, well, are the Americans serious, or should we be afraid of the Americans? Maybe we should be afraid, and maybe we should go to the negotiating table, but they're not ready to do that yet. And so it's more than diplomacy. It's this political tit for tat, and it's trying to force the other side to guess what our intentions are. So Joe Biden actually got a lot out of this bombing. Despite the fact that it's illegal, he knew there wouldn't be any pushback from the American people. He knew there wouldn't be any pushback from the Turks. He knew there wouldn't be anything more than a public statement from the Russians. And he knew the Iranians couldn't defend themselves and wouldn't want to, because he didn't bomb Iranians. As you guys pointed out, he bombed Iraqis. And so this was like the perfect little bombing. It was the perfect little attack if you're Joe Biden, because there's no cost that comes with it on the other side.
But there is a cost. I mean, if you think about it, the Iraqis that were killed, they were still Iraqis. And even though it wasn't necessarily on Iraqi soil, I would imagine that the people in Iraq take great qualms, A, with the United States being there, B, with the United States having been responsible for the killing of like 1 million of them, and C, continuously doing it, even now. Meaning, even though it was done under Trump with horrific, they led Soleimani there, they murdered him on Iraqi territory. And so I would imagine they're still hot about that. And the killing of Iraqis, whether it's in Syria or whether it's in Iraq, I would imagine has consequences, especially for the government of Iraq. Not to mention the argument that this is for Iran still has political consequences of being a statement against Iran, even if these people are Iraqis. Does it make sense? Like, there's still consequences to this, or are those consequences just not significant enough to matter?
They're not significant enough because Iraq is not a unified country. It's a divided country. Really, it's 3 countries, right? You have Kurdistan, and we work hand in glove with the Kurds. The Kurds were with us on this. They probably participated. You have the Sunni Muslims in the heartland. The Sunnis hate the Shias. The Sunnis have killed Shias over the centuries, without us. And then you've got the Shias, but the Shias are divided. They're divided between the pro-Iran Shias and the secular / anti-Iran Shias. So sure, you've got some people in Iraq that are going to be upset about this, but they're inconsequential, at least for U.S. policy.
That's unfortunate. It really is. Yeah, and I guess I am like you. When the new president comes in, you think to yourself, maybe there'll be more diplomacy. Maybe they're not. Well, no, that's off the table. He wants to come across as strong. He wants to come across as hard. And hence, this is where we are. What do you think we go with this? Do you think Iran, where does the JCPOA go with this? We have about a minute left. But I am curious about this. Does Iran take this slap of sorts, even if they're not Iranians, and still work with the U.S. to get back to the JCPOA? Or do the hardliners look at this as just another reason to not work with the United States?
Well, certainly the hardliners are going to push back. But I think that the Iranians, over the looking ahead to the long term, they see an opportunity. They see an opportunity in an administration that's willing to speak with them even directly, not just indirectly through the Algerians, the Omanis, and the Swiss. And I think that the Iranians really benefited from the JCPOA. Remember, there still is a JCPOA. It's just that we've pulled out of it. So getting us back into that agreement, I think, benefits not just the United States, but certainly Iran, and makes trade that much easier.
John, we're going to have to close it here. And I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I always enjoy it when you come on. Former CIA officer, co-host of The Backstory on Radio Sputnik, and author of the books including The CIA Insider's Guide to the Iran Crisis and A Reluctant Spy. You can follow John on Twitter at John Kiriakou. Learn more about him at johnkiriakou.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with our headlines.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, events, and more across our country as well as across our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the last man on the wall, the indefatigable, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back. I hope everybody's morning continues to go well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 1,129 new coronavirus deaths and 50,925 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 67,868 cases per day. That's a decrease of 26% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 28,622,900 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus. Almost 513,000 people have died from it. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has received the coronavirus jab as the country opened its vaccination program for the wider population. He was administered a jab of Covaxin, an indigenously developed vaccine. India launched its vaccination drive on January 16th, but it was limited to healthcare workers and frontline staff. Now, people over 60 and those who are between 45 and 59 but have other illnesses can get vaccinated. This Saturday, the Food and Drug Administration issued an emergency use authorization for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's a single-shot vaccine with lower efficacy and a lower cost than most other shots available on the market. Along with the continued manufacture and rollout of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, this means the U.S. could be finished vaccinating priority groups by the end of this month, with vaccinations for the general public due, it is reported, in full swing by April. In national political news, the House approved a massive $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, advancing President Joe Biden's top agenda item and providing more resources to schools and businesses. It will boost funding for vaccinations and testing and grant financial relief to Americans across the country. Democrats passed the measure early Saturday morning. The American Rescue Plan would provide $1,400 stimulus checks to millions of Americans across the country and extend federal unemployment benefits through the summer. It would also provide hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to state and local governments, schools, and vaccine and COVID-19 testing efforts, in addition to nutritional and child care assistance. Senate Democrats are racing to finalize a new tax provision that would penalize large companies that pay low wages. The move comes after Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough ruled Thursday night that a $15 minimum wage hike cannot be included in the Senate COVID relief package. We'll be talking about this, by the way, for the next half hour when we get to our next two interviews. First, on the politics of it with Joel Segal, then on the economics of it with our guest, Steve Grumbine. Be back with those in about 10 minutes. Moving on in headlines, in a press release issued Sunday responding to claims of sexual harassment by a second former aide, Governor Andrew Cuomo says he was being playful, but said he may have been insensitive in his remarks. He states, quote, "I never intended to offend anyone or cause any harm. I spend most of my life at work, and colleagues are often also personal friends. At work, sometimes I think I am being playful and make jokes that I think are funny. I do, on occasion, tease people in what I think is a good-natured way," end quote. This is disgusting. He is not responding directly to the most substantive claims that these people are making. He is responding to something completely different. He's responding by talking about what he did, when most of what they were complaining about, as far as I can tell, specifically Lindsey Boylan, are the physical approaches where she says that he forcibly kissed her on the lips, that he was repeatedly touching her, and here's another thing. Let's come back to this. His rumored former girlfriend, Lisa Shields, who Lindsey Boylan says rumored former girlfriend of his, basically she looked kind of like her, and some of Cuomo's top staffers told her that he thought that she was like the more attractive sister of this rumored ex of his, and then he started to call her Lisa. I don't know if that's good-natured playing, or if that's I do know that's pretty cringy, not stalkery, but you get what I'm saying. It's weird. It's like a perverse way of relating with another human being. Anyway. The governor did deny that he touched anybody and never propositioned anybody. again, those contradicted claims made by his former aide, Lindsey Boylan, who alleged that he not just touched her, but forcibly kissed her on the lips. Cuomo has also now asked State Attorney General Letitia James to choose an investigator to probe sexual harassment allegations against him. Beth Garvey, special counsel and senior advisor to Governor Cuomo, said in a statement Saturday that Cuomo has, quote, requested an independent review and all staff will cooperate in that endeavor. Former federal judge Barbara Jones will lead the review, end quote. President Biden backs an independent review of sexual harassment claims against Governor Andrew Cuomo, with press secretary Jen Psaki voicing that the president believes every woman should be heard, quote unquote. Andre, we've got this clip. Let's play it.
Well, first, President Biden has been consistent that he believes that every woman should be heard, should be treated with respect and with dignity. Charlotte should be treated with respect and dignity. So should Lindsay. And there should be an independent review looking into these allegations. And that's certainly something he supports and we believe should move forward as quickly as possible.
And I can't, thank you, Andre. I can't help but think of President Biden like softly asleep in his reading room in the White House, just dreaming of the smell of his aide's hair, which he probably would be. I don't know, but for him to talk about respecting every woman, it's just kind of weird to me. The whole thing is kind of weird to me. Jamarl, before we move on, any comments here?
Yeah, definitely. Look, whatever you want to think, Cuomo saying, I might have been playful, I might have been joking, that's a step backwards. That's him redefining his position. And I got to be honest, it's almost, I would argue, a signal of guilt. He comes out with a very strong statement at first. Yeah, I didn't do it. These statements are, spurless claims against me. And then it's, well, I may joke around. I may have fun. I may do this. I may do that. Is it possible that the women you're quote unquote joking around with are not joking with you, and that the flirtation is not necessarily welcomed, and that other people in your office may have gotten used to it and may be okay with it, but the moment that you introduce somebody new to that picture, that person may not necessarily be okay with this kind of casual, what do you want to call it? Casual harassment, if you want to call it casual sexual harassment, or casual chauvinism. Yeah. I mean, you have multiple women. Are any other women coming out? And if you have 4 more women to come out, oh, Lord Jesus. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is the fact that Cuomo is backing away from this point. And I got to be honest, it sounds like something he would do. And it sounds like something he'd be mendacious enough to lie about, considering he was mendacious to lie about all of those grandmas that were being killed in the retirement home, the nursing homes, that nobody apparently seems to care about anymore. But yeah, he has no choice, by the way, with having Letitia James investigate this. No choice. Because if he is any part of it, because he tried to handpick his own investigator. And at a certain point, somebody probably told him, look, dude, that's a bad idea. You are being charged with very serious things, not just on the front of the investigation from the federal government about the nursing home deaths that you were trying to hide in order to avoid that same investigation, but also on this very point of the number of women that you might have been harassing and the things that you were doing in your office. You cannot manhandle this, in which case they have to pass it off to people who definitely have been after him. So Cuomo doesn't have a choice at this point. And if these claims are legit by any measure, oh, man. So, yeah, I think Cuomo is a bit of hot water.
Like you pointed out, I think this is the second time you pointed it out this morning, and it's the right point, in my opinion, to point out. He is making concessions now. He's inching further along towards his apparently inevitable decline as a political figure. I mean, unless the scandal manages to blow over, everybody gets distracted by something, or the independent report comes back with nothing, with bupkis, we'll see what actually happens. But things are not looking good for Cuomo right now. Let's move on into more headlines. In an address on Sunday at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando, that's CPAC, is Trump's first public appearance since he left the White House. Former President Donald Trump denied he has any plans to found a new political party, branding the idea fake news. He has also called for unity of the GOP while naming all Republicans who supported him and calling out by name those who didn't. Trump on Sunday night also denied that he was watching live television coverage of the deadly Capitol Hill riot in response to accusations that he was watching it all unfold. He did condemn the siege, but called the outrage surrounding it a double standard. In my opinion, Donald Trump has further cemented his leadership of the Republican Party with that speech. It's weird, his first public appearance in a couple of months practically at this point. It's weird to me because not that long ago, I thought he was dead in the water and as a political figure. after what happened on January 6th. But we had a good conversation with Lee about this morning, and I think he's right. The Democrats overplayed their hand a bit. I know that you disagree with that in part, Jamarl. But regardless, good conversation earlier. You can go back and check that out. That was at 7:30 a.m. Eastern this morning.
I think I agree with 90% of what your dad said. Like 90%. Like, because I think Trump, it is his party. The moderates have lost. I think that was my speech the other day. The moderates have lost. They haven't even got the powder in their gun. And Trump is dominating that conference. They had that golden Trump statue and everything. Like, it was very clear. And this wasn't, some weird offshoot. This was CPAC. So let's be very, very clear on who's dominating CPAC. And that's Trump. The moderates lost.
It's true. Yes. We got more headlines. I think we should move to them. In New York on Saturday, Asian Americans and many supporters attended the Rise Up Against Anti-Asian Hate rally in Foley Square. The rally was held to protest a wave of attacks on Asian Americans, including a large number of elderly people. The rally was attended by New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, who told the crowd there were signs of a surge in violence at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. The rally was hosted by the Asian American Federation, an umbrella organization that advocates for better policies and services for Asian Americans. In international news, former CIA Director John Brennan called for President Biden to ban Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from the U.S. Brennan, who led the CIA from March 2013 to January 2017, said Biden must hold bin Salman accountable despite the strategic alliance between the two countries. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has stated that there are methods more effective than sanctions for the U.S. to implement against Mohammed bin Salman. Psaki insisted that the U.S. still intends to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for the alleged involvement of the Crown Prince in Khashoggi's death, but did not delve into details of how that would be achieved. The fiancé of the murdered Saudi journalist, again Jamal Khashoggi, has also called for Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince to be punished without delay over his killing. The Turkish academic researcher Hatice Cengiz made a plea that world leaders distance themselves from the Crown Prince and impose punishments such as sanctions on Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi was killed while visiting the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey in October 2018, and his body was dismembered gruesomely. In Myanmar, security forces opened fire and made a mass arrest Sunday as they sought to break up protests against the military seizure of power. A UN human rights official said it had quote-unquote credible information that at least 18 people were killed and 30 were wounded. Confirming the deaths of protesters has been difficult amid the chaos and general lack of news from official sources. As of Saturday, 854 people had been arrested, charged, or sentenced, and 771 were being detained or sought for arrest. Washington has imposed sanctions on Myanmar because of the coup, and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said it would, quote, impose further costs on those responsible, end quote, promising details in the coming days. Meanwhile, also in Myanmar news, ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi was hit with another charge on Monday. Suu Kyi appeared in a court hearing via video conference where she was charged under Myanmar's colonial-era penal code, prohibiting publishing information that may cause fear or alarm, quote-unquote. This marks the third charge against Suu Kyi. Her next hearing is scheduled for March 15th. In other related news, Myanmar's UN ambassador Kya Mo-tun has been fired. The announcement was made a day after he urged the United Nations to use any means necessary to reverse the February 1st military coup. Iran rejected a European Union offer to arrange direct nuclear talks with the U.S. The U.S. had said it would attend the talks, which the EU had hoped to host in the coming days. However, Washington had refused to provide sanctions relief before face-to-face negotiations with Iran had taken place. And by the way, we had two back-to-back segments on foreign policy. First on MBS, Mohammed bin Salman and Biden with Laith Marouf. This was at 8:30. Then right after that with John Kiriakou at 8:45, where we were talking about Iran and the airstrike last week on Iraqi soil. Biden's first airstrike, basically. Moving on here, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Saturday for the withdrawal of Eritrean and Ethiopian regional forces from the Tigray region of Ethiopia and for an end to killings and human rights violations there. Thousands of civilians are believed to have been killed since Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed launched a military operation against leaders in the Tigray region. After seizing control of Tigray's main cities in late November, Abiy declared victory and maintained that no civilians were harmed in the offensive. Blinken recognized the Ethiopian Prime Minister's commitment to allow humanitarian aid to the region and said that the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, would send a disaster assistance response team to Ethiopia. In Hong Kong, authorities have charged dozens of pro-democracy figures, protesters, whatever you want to call them. The standard line is that they're pro-democracy figures anyway, with violating the Chinese territory's new national security law. The 47 people charged on Sunday were accused of breaking that law by helping to organize an informal election primary last July for Hong Kong's pro-democratic political camp. In doing so, the authorities argue they may have violated the law's subversion provisions, which ban interfering with, disrupting, or undermining the functions of the Chinese or Hong Kong governments. Those charged will be arraigned on Monday at a courthouse in the West Kowloon area, where another trial of pro-democracy activists is continuing. Hundreds of protests have gathered outside of the courts, many chanting slogans including "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times," deemed an illegal slogan under the security law introduced last summer, and "Fight for Freedom, Stand with Hong Kong." Police warned those gathered to split into groups of no more than 4 or face fines for failing to do so. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with our next guest, Joel Segal, talking about the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill that the House passed on Saturday, what's coming for it next, what it has, what it's missing, and the political details behind the scenes, and more. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back on the other side of the short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Yo! Tashawn, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So another really interesting thing that has been taking place has to do with the Uber, and I would argue excellent focus on the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. Now, the House approved a massive $1.9 trillion package, passing it early Saturday morning. The American Rescue Plan will provide the promised $2,000 minus $600 stimulus checks and extend federal unemployment benefits through the summer. That number is $1,400. I'm making a point that they promised $2,000, but they're including Trump's $600. That's all. It's me being slightly bitter. It would also provide hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to state and local governments, schools, and vaccine and COVID-19 testing efforts, in addition to nutritional and child care assistance. Here's the catch. They put in the $15 provision of the minimum wage. Now, congratulations to the House for doing this. This puts pressure on the Senate to find a way to get that passed. Now, Senate Democrats are racing to finalize a new tax provision that will penalize large companies that pay low wages. This move comes after Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough ruled Thursday night that the $15 minimum wage hike cannot be included in the COVID relief package. My point is that not only could it be included, the 51st vote by our esteemed Vice President of the United States can overrule the parliamentarian. This is a false wall. if Joe Biden really wants to do something for the American public, instead of hugging that woman at the food bank, $15 an hour would help that woman. $50K would help that woman in college debt relief. But yeah, he can do it. You don't need the parliamentarian. To have this conversation, we're joined by Joel Segal, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 767, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act. He's co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, JAM, and nationwide multiracial climate action network. And Joel, once again, you were the first person I thought of, honestly. Because the wild part is, you were the one that got the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill. And you have my you have my esteem for that forever. Regardless of whatever happens, you get credit for that from me. And so for the politics of this stuff, you're the person I like to talk to. $15 an hour. It's in the bill for the House. How do they get it passed in the Senate? That's the question.
Well, hello. Happy Monday to everybody, to your listeners, to all of you and your where you work. I don't think they're not going to get it passed. It's going to be taken out of the Senate bill because they don't have the votes for it, and Manchin says he's not going to vote for it if that's in there, and if Manchin says it's not going to be in the bill, they're going to take it out, and they'll pass a COVID-19 relief bill without the $15 minimum wage hike, and which is not even that much. Really, $15 now adjusted to inflation and rent, it's still, it's better than whatever $7.25, but
it's a compromise at this point. I mean, if we're talking about productivity, the wages for the public have basically stayed stagnant. Productivity has gone through the roof, and if productivity has gone through the roof, that productivity equals wages. It equals money. That money has been basically ferreted to the top or expropriated to the top. And so, yeah, we're at a point where our workers should be getting an increase in wages. I guess the thing I'm getting here is there's no political pressure that Biden can apply to people like Manchin to get on board for this. And isn't it true that Kamala Harris can overrule the parliamentarian?
That's an interesting. Yes, she can. Will she? No, I don't think she is. I mean, having worked in the Democratic Party as the progressive within and kind of knowing the machinery of it, I think I always watch these news shows, on Sunday morning. That's I remember when we were working on the Affordable Care Act, and Baucus, who was the senator, I think it was from Montana, said we're not going to have single payer anywhere. We're not even going to talk about it. So I immediately transitioned to the public option, held an emergency meeting in Mr. Conyers' Judiciary Committee room, and said, look, if we can't get single payer, let's at least try the public option. And I remember Joe Lieberman, who got all kinds of campaign contributions from insurance companies and pharmaceuticals, he said, no, I'm not going to support it. And even the senior staffers at the Progressive Caucus, they were like, okay, then we're not going to support a public option. Yet the Progressive Caucus members had kind of depended on me, to work on that. And they nixed it, right? And that was the end of that. And so then I was like, okay, let's pass the Affordable Care Act. And then I realized there was tremendous opposition with Rahm Emanuel and a lot of the Democrats. This is sort of an untold story, but I kind of led the effort to push back on some of the progressives who were going to say no to Obamacare, including Mr. Conyers, and a much longer story. But I've just learned that that's what happens. If they don't feel like they got the votes, on a particular provision of a bill, they abandon that, and it's not going to be in there. I think the question now becomes, once the bill gets passed, can you introduce another, what's called a standalone bill, to raise the minimum wage? But what the Republicans will do, and the corporate Democrats, is they'll say, it's a trope they use, but it's not true. They'll say, if you pass the $15 minimum wage, it's going to drive businesses out, and people won't have a wage at all. But if you look at Seattle, if you look at any place where they have a $15 minimum wage, that has not happened. It's just not true. It's a big lie.
But Joel, and thanks for being with us. Doesn't that simply mean that they don't have the votes for it? It's not going to get passed in this larger bill, like you're saying. It wouldn't get passed as a standalone bill. that means that dream is dead in the water, right?
Yes. You're saying the $15 provision?
Exactly. Yes.
It's dead now. I think what has to happen is, this is John Conyers 101, right? If he and I were going to, when we would strategize about any bill that we introduced that was super progressive, we really vetted it carefully to different organizations across the country. We did briefings. We'd get on MSNBC. We would have a discussion to make sure people understood and had some empathy. Right now, the people who you won't see on television, on CNN, MSNBC, and the corporate media, are the people who need the $15. And I haven't seen one worker interview. That's why we need Sputnik and we need the alternative press to raise those voices of the people who are just completely, they're invisible. So the only thing that we hear is that businesses will be driven out of business. It's just like if we support single payer, we're going to go bankrupt. And this is where the progressive movement's fragmentation it really hurts us. And
is this also what corporate media definitely hurts this country?
Yeah.
Because, everybody in corporate media, I often say these guys are millionaires paid by billionaires. They're talking heads. And, they have their health care. That's not going to be an issue for them. They have their education stuff. That's not going to be an issue for them. They make more than $15 an hour. That's not even in their rear view mirror in regards to it. So if you have all of these people who are basically in a situation where they are separate and removed from the thing to which they're talking about, despite the fact that they're on these huge platforms talking to the people who basically are in this boat and are in this situation, it's somewhat problematic and it's almost deceptive almost. You're right. You should have more people who are barely making ends meet, or you should have these conversations about, the majority of Americans don't have $500 in the bank, or 42% of Americans before COVID were making $18,000 a year. That's basically a poverty wage. That's nearly half the country in poverty. That stuff doesn't come up. What the Democrats are trying to do, though, is trying to jerry-rig this in. They're racing to finalize a new tax provision that will penalize large companies that pay low wages. They're basically trying to get these companies to pay low wages on the back end, meaning trying to force them to do it, as opposed to either getting rid of the filibuster and doing it or overriding the parliamentarian. Joe, I find this to be horrendous. If Joe Biden doesn't get that $15 an hour minimum wage through, that would be a campaign promise broken for one, and something that is going to haunt him going forward. At least that's my assessment. What's yours?
Very good assessment. He's a very shrewd politician, and I know what they're going to do, especially since it was African Americans and mainly African Americans who got him into the White House. And there will be a standalone bill to raise the minimum wage, to $15. But they're going to have it's going to have to look like a campaign strategy, right? To do something like that, you have to get rid of these mythologies that the $15 minimum wage is going to drive small businesses out of business. So yesterday I went to go pick up some bagels at a so-called small business, and there were people lined up out the door. Now, there's no reason why this bagel company can't pay their workers $15 an hour. And again, where they have implemented a $15 minimum wage, it's actually been a boom to the economy, because if you got more money in your pocket, you're going to spend it, right?
That's right.
You're going to spend.
I think part of the argument here is that
speed of money.
I get what you're. I think that part of the argument here is that larger companies have pre-existing efficiencies built into place. So, for instance, if you look at who's able to pay a $15 or above minimum wage right now, you look at the list. It's like Bank of America, Amazon, Ben and Jerry's, Costco, Facebook. Whether you're banks like J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Huntington National Bank, et cetera, these are already large. If you compare that with a smaller, struggling credit union who might face a more onerous burden to try to cross that gap, I get where people are coming from with that. It doesn't mean that I'm opposed to raising the minimum wage to or above $15 an hour, but we don't have enough time for it on this side of the segment. Any quick closing thoughts on that topic, Joel?
No, I think your point is valid. That's why I'm saying that whenever you're doing something progressive and controversial, there has to be thorough discussions, town hall meetings. They should be on CNN and MSNBC, both with the small business owners, the experts, and those who can't live off of a starvation wage. And the country's going to have to come together on the consensus that, free enterprise works, but you know what? It's really hard to run a business without workers. And there can't be workers versus management. It has to be like they do in Europe. They all got to be working together, for the sake of what's best for the community. And then we're not there yet. We have this, us versus them mentality that I've talked about over and over again. I'm against that. There has to be a moral consensus that if you work, you got to get paid what you're worth. But you know what? I'll close by saying that we have to go big. And Roosevelt, COVID-19 is going to be with us for another year, and there's 17 million jobs that have been lost. We need to go big and make sure that people have a safety net. They can pay their rent. Businesses can function. The COVID-19 relief package is a great start, but it's not the end. It's just the beginning. People need relief right now until we get out of the pandemic.
Joel, we are out of time. We've got to close it here. I'm sure we'll be continuing pretty much this exact same conversation in this vein, and I know that Jamarl would appreciate your reference to Roosevelt there, but we're out of time. For those listening, that was the voice of Joel Segal, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. He's also co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network. That's a nationwide multiracial climate action network. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break, continuing this conversation with our next guest, Steve Grumbine. You're right back.
We got no Steve.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
No Steve.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're going to be joined pretty soon by Steve Grumbine. We're still getting him on. And we're going to continue our conversation about the $1.9 trillion bill, stimulus, that is passed the House, that is basically trying to pass the Senate. And we were having this conversation about the $15 an hour minimum wage basically on its deathbed. We were having a conversation as a team, and I made the point about one of the other good provisions that's in that bill is $300 a month for children or for parents or kids with children. I've said before, if children indeed are our future, how those children turn out is in some respects, let's say, a responsibility in some level of the state, especially if the resources that are necessary for that kid to become a whole person are not necessarily there. And we can provide those resources to ensure that those people are whole. We had John Kiriakou on last week having a conversation about Donald Trump's program that was actually good. That program was good because it gave basically felons the ability to get an education and the resources, once they get out, to proceed in their life with either resources, meaning talking about money, but basically giving those people a help or helping hand as they go about their way in life after the jail sentence. They found that the recidivism rate, shockingly not, went down when they gave people assistance on that front. So if they gave people assistance in the beginning, let's say when they were kids, let's say when they were growing up, to ensure that they had the nutrients, ensure that their housing and everything else was up to snuff, to ensure that that kid had a relatively decent, intact life with its needs met. Can we do that? And the answer is yes. Is Joe Biden doing that with his plan? The answer is no. But at the very least, it's a small, I guess, almost like a Social Security payment for children. I agree with this. In fact, it should be higher. Plan for periodic payments in 2021. And I'll just read it. This is Kiplinger. Regarding the advance payment, the plan proposes having the IRS send out checks periodically from July through December to families. The periodic payments would account for half of the family's 2021 child tax credit. For example, if monthly payments were made, this would result in payments up to $250 per child, $300 per child under 6 for 6 months, and would be nice windfall for families, many families. Take a family of 5 with 3 children aged 12, 7, and 5. Now, assuming the family qualifies for the higher child credit and doesn't opt out of the advanced payments, they could get $800 a month from the IRS from July to December, totaling $4,800. Yes, I like that. I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that should be instantiated as almost a UBI or Social Security for those payments. So, Shane, what do you think about this? I mean, the Democrats are passing this. It is going to the Senate. The $15 an hour is basically on its deathbed, which is, look, you and I have had this conversation, and I made the point that if Joe Biden passes the $15 an hour minimum wage, that would be significant. And that would be something that would be a very strong thing, standing there saying, elect us. We did something for you by increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, basically doubling the federal minimum wage. But if it's on its deathbed, that's going to be a problem. I mean, that honestly, he should have pushed that with all due diligence. And in the same way that Donald Trump was willing to literally let people go without pay so he could build a wall that wasn't necessary, Democrats are never willing to put their, push foot to the metal in order to fight for the American public. And my argument is if Joe Biden went full throttle to pass the stimulus, screaming, I am doing this for America, I am doing this for America, and everybody that is against me is stopping me from doing this for America, yeah, I think he will be able to make inroads. And I agree with Segal. It should be, if you really believe it, if this is something that you really want to get passed, it should be a verbose, loud, and yeah, you should harness the public to your will that $15 an hour is necessary. You should have people going out on those news shows explaining that $15 is necessary. And honestly, it doesn't necessarily seem that full court press. If anything, what was said in the reports, I think it was Politico, that Biden was basically downing the $50, basically putting out trial balloons, letting people know that it's not going to pass. Hey, man, I don't think we're going to pass this. Ooh, I don't think this is going to be able to work. That doesn't sound like the confident person who actually is going to get something accomplished and is willing to go scorched earth to make that a reality, to fight for America. It seems like he's more willing to fight for Neera Tanden than he is to fight for $15 an hour. What do you think about it, Shane?
I mean, would he successfully, there's one way to look at it, maybe not the way that most would look at it, maybe not the way that you would want to look at it, but would a $15 minimum wage be enough to buy off progressives? Would that stave off criticism of his foreign policy or the other key components of the most problematic aspects of our state?
It will not stave it off, but what it would do is it would hit a lot of people who are not progressives. That's the catch. Like this is at this point would be for America itself. It's not just a small wing of the party. This is, you're doing something like this that is going to affect America's Republicans, independents, and lefties. And even if progressives don't give him the entire credit for it because he's bombing and everything else, he would be able to weed some of them off. So, I
think he would weed a lot of them off.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I literally said earlier myself, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So, for people who are adamantly in support of these policies, I can get why him passing it, he would cement his status to some extent as a larger figure in the history of left-leaning politics in America, even though a lot of folks don't actually think he's that far to the left. You think he's relatively far to the right, and in a lot of ways, I agree. But I don't know, man. In my opinion, foreign policy should take precedent because it seems to me that that's what's guaranteeing a lot of the worst elements of our state. It's what's keeping wages low historically. But we can continue this conversation right now with our guest. We are currently joined by Steve Grumbine. He's a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. Those are a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively, dedicated to education and advocacy for modern monetary theory. Steve, thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thank you for being with us. Let's talk about the $1.9 trillion plan and the $15 minimum wage, showing all signs of getting axed, not just from that plan, but from any near future hope of success in American politics. Let's start with the bill first, though. What do you think of this bill, Steve?
Too little, too late. It's definitely, in my opinion, I think there's been a lot of pressure. I think the shame game on Biden has been pretty severe. I mean, the concept of bombs before checks is not insignificant. And I think a lot of people, are going to hold on to that for an awful long time, because this is not just some sort of an offshoot. This is people's lives. I mean, that money is the difference between eating and not eating in many cases. And so I think that, yes, they're gonna try and put something through. I suppose the Senate will support it as well. The question becomes, how much is enough? And I think you've got a year of being shut down to atone for here. We've got an awful lot of damage to fix, and I don't think this comes anywhere near close to touching it.
No, it doesn't come close. It's not the 2000 that he told people he was going to give. He was on the campaign stump over and over, 2000. You should have dispensed that immediately. You had the power to do it. You should have did it. That should have been one of the first things, because you want to protect your Senate majority. Ossoff and Warnock are probably the two weakest potential senators that are there that could be picked off. You should protect them. Also, the $15 an hour minimum wage. Look, I'm bringing that up because that's a really big deal. I mean, you're talking about the productivity gains in this country with the wages basically being stagnant. That means that the productivity gains are basically going to the people at the top. And that is instantiated. Obama, 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. That's basically everything going to the top 1% with workers scrambling for the scraps. Yeah, there should be a fundamental change in the way we go about our things. And Steve, I agree with you. It's too little, too late. 1.9 trillion should be a floor. I mean, it should be a floor, not a ceiling. And yet, here we are. Can we afford those $15 an hour minimum wage? Does that really destroy businesses in the way that all of these people are all of a sudden saying on mainstream media, oh man, it's going to destroy businesses, it's going to destroy businesses? That's not really true, is it? Especially with the additional income that is going to be dropped into the economy by people who basically are going to spend that money almost immediately.
Yes. No, so you just nailed it. When you are somebody that is very wealthy and you've got this money out there, then what you do is you just store it, you save it, right? However, if you're poor, if you're desperate, like these people are, that money doesn't sit there in your bank account. It's a pass-through. It's immediately spent on necessities. It's immediately spent on survival. That's one thing. The other thing that you mentioned is the aggregates. Everybody has $15 an hour minimum. That's a lot of money that's going to be inserted, into the economy, because ultimately all those people are spending that money. And so if I'm not prone to going out for a decent lunch, I'm used to packing a cheese sandwich on, old bread or something like that, and all of a sudden I've got $15 in my pocket and I can go to lunch, I might just do that. So this is a way of fattening everybody's wallets. It's not just one, hey, this guy's got 15. He's going to be spending that 15, that pent-up demand that he wasn't able to realize prior to the additional income. He's going to be able to exact something with that demand. So I think that on the surface, $15 an hour is a really important thing. I want to say, though, that I think that it's kind of a smoke and mirrors, though, because if wages had kept up, we would be well over $20 an hour. We would be closer to $30 an hour. And more importantly, if you look over at Ayanna Pressley, she is advancing a federal job guarantee, which is a core component of my entire activism, and a core component of being able to raise the bottom for everyone is not just the wage, it's also the benefit package, right? So what happens is that since we're still stuck in this land of your health insurance and everything else comes through your employer, if you don't have a package that allows you to go to the doctor and have days off and child care and all those things baked in, then chances are you're going to lead a very, very restrictive life. There's no freedom in economic injustice. So a job guarantee gives them more than just $15 an hour. In fact, it gives a living wage. So that would set the de facto floor. So the 15 is almost redundant if you can pass that federal job guarantee. And let that wage be a living wage instead of a 15 minimum.
Well, that's going to be why companies and corporations are going to do any and everything in their power to prevent that jobs guarantee. Because whether people realize it or not, having a jobs guarantee under normal circumstances, like right now, the private industry has all of the cards because you, as a person, you might not you might not be a slave working on a plantation, but you will choose a plantation on which to work. Your needs will make you do that. Your hunger, your ability to live somewhere, all of those things will force you into going into the job market where you are going to have to put your labor on the market for profit or for some kind of money or something like that. I'm making the point that all of that lays in the hands of private enterprise for the most part. The moment that you add a workers or a job guarantee, the government at this point says, look, you will get a decent job. What does it mean for private enterprise at that point? They no longer hold all of the cards associated with how people work. And the amount of money that they pay people, if they're paying $10 an hour, well, you don't want to work for them paying $10 an hour if you can get a decent government job that is going to be doing something beautifying and bettering your country for 15 or 16. You know what I mean? Like,
Dude,
it's a big deal.
Let me interject. This is a huge deal because this is the fight that us MMTers have with the UBI folks. What you just said is the case for the job guarantee. UBI, those same bad companies out there can subsidize really crappy wages.
Yes.
When you have a federal job guarantee, what you have done is you have taken away that 40 hours that you could have given over to Walmart. Now it's in your job guarantee. They can't subsidize that anymore, so they've got to poach you from the job guarantee.
Right.
And by doing that, they've got to meet or beat that price. This is where the UBI falls.
And benefits.
Not transformative.
And benefits. I mean, like they have to compete at that point with an actual actor that is not them. So let's do this. Let's take a break. Steve, are you willing to stay with us for another, I think it's about 14 minutes? Excellent. Because I want to get into something that's probably going to cause an argument. And I'm going to make the argument that $15 an hour minimum wage, or for that matter, $20 an hour minimum wage, is undermined by the notion of automation. And that automation in and of itself creates a competition with these wages. And I'm going to explain what I mean when I'm going to say that there is a contradiction here that is not necessarily worked out and that I think we're going to run into faster. That Yang, on this point, is probably right, that the automation is going to clash with the increase in wages. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The voice that you guys were listening to is Steve Grumbine, political, economic, social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progressives in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4 respectively dedicated to education and advocacy of modern monetary theory. Great affable guy, a guest that we always love. You can follow Steve on Twitter at SD Grumbine and at Real Progress US. We'll be back in a moment with Shane's The Rap. And Steve is nice enough to join us. We'll be back in a moment. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Again, that is 202-521-1320. We continue to be joined by Steve Grumbine. For those listening, he is a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. Those are organizations dedicated to education and advocacy, pardon me, for modern monetary theory. And we've got calls, too. I think we should go to them. We got room for more, though, 202-521-1320. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. Hashtag free Julian Assange. The charges need to be dropped. We got to keep up the support for him. Haiti is protesting against the U.S. and UN and OAS imposed neoliberal puppet dictatorship. People should, just leave Haiti alone. Let them have their own self-determination, their own sovereignty, their own democracy. They need help, but not in a way to control them. They're blaming this person by the name of U.S. diplomat Helen Lane. I think she's part of the UN, two integrated offices. So yes, Haiti is a sovereign nation. They need help, and also they have this thing going on in Arizona where they're going to count. Georgia's going to let people audit over 2 million mail-in ballots to see what's going on with them, to see if how many are authentic, So we're going to find out about that in the next month or so. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say today.
Tarif, thank
you for the call.
Oh, go ahead, Shane.
Appreciate the call. No, I appreciate it. As always, you're right on with the Julian Assange stuff, and I appreciate the call. We got more callers, 202-521-1320. Let's go to Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's going on?
Yeah. Look, I'd just like to get Steve's opinion. Obviously, he studies economics, and I myself am a student of economics and politics at the University of Sydney doing my master's. And look, I used to subscribe to the new monetary theory sort of idea of things. And I understand the concept about it. Basically, the problem at the moment is no matter how much money they're throwing into the economy, it's not creating money velocity. Money velocity in America is basically dead. But the problem is, as I see it, is sort of like as physics, like in terms of like philosophy. In terms of velocity, you've created like this black hole where you've sunk into it. And unfortunately, the more matter you throw into the black hole, in other words, money, the greater the gravitational pull of the black hole. And basically, it's too late. You're going to be sucked into the singularity and spat out the other side. The whole world is. And I just think that by throwing more money at this problem, it just increases the mass of the black hole, which therefore increases the gravitational pull, so to speak, in a physics sense.
Gravitational inflation.
Yeah.
That's effectively the idea that you're getting across. Steve, what's your take on that?
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for calling in and asking this question. Let me just state outright, though, that that's not in any way, shape, or form a correct understanding. The way this works is it's a circuit. It's a fiat system, and by a circuit, what we're talking about is taxes drain money from the economy. They purge reserves, etc. So there is a valve there letting money go, deleting money, clearing it away. It's not just pouring more and more and more and more and more and more and more into the thing. You're deleting it as you're taxing it away, and you're spending it in different places. So if you're constantly spending it at the top, there is no aggregate demand. You spend it down at the bottom, and you've got the ability to exact that demand. Now that demand can be realized. So it's important when I hear people talking about just printing endless money, I realize that they fail the tax side. They don't understand that there is a release valve, which is all part of the circuit. And
I might be wrong, but I think the part of it that he's commenting on, and Michael, if you're still with us, you can clarify. I think you're largely talking about the stock market and Wall Street, which does seem to have an ever-growing demand for more money to keep up the valuation of stocks and the various indexes that run our economy as a whole. And of course, the argument that gets made to the public is that this keeps 401ks afloat. This keeps people's retirement accounts and investment accounts afloat. There's another question entirely of how many people are actually dependent on those or how many people are living hand to mouth, but that's at least the talking point. I think he was talking about Wall Street, and with quantitative easing everything, I don't see that money getting taxed out of existence. It just seems to be getting stockpiled there in speculations.
But even that quantitative easing, though, that is still not quote unquote printing money. That's just debt swaps. You're changing the form of money. You're going from a bond form to a different type of form. You're going from a long-term bond to a short-term bond. They're just changing the nature. It's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. It's not a net infusion, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so the Fed, what it does is it does do a lot of bad stuff. I mean, a lot of horrible stuff based on neoliberal thinking. And so what they do is they backstop these Wall Street, fiascos, and the Fed takes that money on. It's just shifting the money. So the Fed assumes that money, keeps it on its balance sheets while providing liquidity to those other groups that made really crappy, risky decisions.
And by the way, they did this to the tune of $17 trillion or something? I mean, the Fed put a huge amount of money on their balance sheet.
I think the argument that Michael was making, I don't want to misrepresent him, but I think he was making that we are going to continue doing that there's an incentive for us to keep doing that because like a Ponzi scheme, you need to throw more money into it in order to keep the pyramid above it. standing. You need to keep building up that foundation or whatever. You need to keep putting money into it. And so into perpetuity, it seems like we're going to continue to do that, whatever criticisms we may have of the neoliberal procedures at hand.
Well, that's just it. He made the point about velocity of money, and he said the velocity of money is dead. But again, the velocity of money, that refers to how fast money is moving through your economy. If you put it to people at the top, it just sits there. If you give it to people at the bottom in the way that we're talking about, that money has to be spent immediately because those people don't have the money in the first place. Meaning those people...
No, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and taxes provide the escape valve.
It seems like we're
going
to keep doing that.
We may keep doing that, but I guess the point that Steve is making is there is an escape valve for it. There is a relief valve. That's the point that Steve is making, that it's not necessarily a correct explanation of it, that those functions do exist. And because I don't want to misrepresent you, Steve, I wanted to bring in one other problem for both of us, actually for everybody here. If the wages increase, the incentive for those companies to automate also increases. Now, understand what I mean. The reason why that incentive increases is because the machine that the company would have bought that might have been, let's say, $14.99, might have been perfectly okay to use that worker when that worker was making $7.50. But the moment that worker makes $15 an hour, that machine becomes more likely to be bought by that corporation that is annoyed that they have to pay these workers that much money, and on top of that, thinks that they can get a better benefit for that. That's no different than sending jobs overseas in order to get a cheaper workforce. In this case, you can keep the job here, fire that human being, and place that robot. How do we get around that? Because basically what that means is increasing the wages in order for employees to have some level of fair wage that is in any way aligned with productivity automatically creates the situation necessary for those companies to basically automate and get rid of those jobs entirely. How do we deal with that, Steve? How does modern monetary theory deal with that contradiction that seems to be built into our socio-economic system?
It's not a contradiction. To me, we embrace automation. We love it. We hope we gain the benefits of it, not just at the top, but throughout society. With a federal job guarantee, what you end up with is the opportunity to really replace the man in this equation and turn it into the public purpose. So public purpose employment, which is, think about it. If we do a Green New Deal, okay, all this talk about automation is irrelevant because the jobs are going to be so much. We're going to be trying to get, people coming to this country, immigrants, to help fill these jobs. We're going to be looking to purge the fire sector to fill these jobs. I mean, just look at Texas right now, right? With the amount of work that I have friends down that are working round the clock trying to help get water to people whose pipes burst. There's so much work. And with climate change coming and the destruction that's coming, you can't automate the fixing of the coastal waters. You can't fix all the houses that are wrecked and all the plumbing that needs. You can't fix that with automation. That's number one. Number two, a federal job guarantee, which is, again, corner to everything I talk about. If you have that federal job guarantee, now people are serving their local communities instead of worrying about whether or not McDonald's got a kiosk to order Big Macs from. And so to me, bring it on, baby. It's just we got to stop thinking like the man is the only way to get employment. We got to stop pushing away the public sector and start realizing we have the ability to make life good for everyone. And if McDonald's thinks that putting kiosks in is better, maybe it keeps young kids from getting zits from all the burger grease that slaps on their face. I mean, literally, it's an opportunity to increase the overall standard of living for all if we, in fact, structure society to absorb that and put that federal job guarantee in place. That is very, very transformational. It's extremely important. And Ayanna Pressley's bill right now, to me, is the single most important thing we should all be talking about other than maybe relief checks. It is so important. All those things that Yang said immediately dissipate. They're gone. They don't even exist anymore because the federal job guarantee provides jobs for all, period, full stop. You want a job, you got a job. And the local communities, think about all the things that are not done. I'm from the Silver Spring
Steve,
area.
Man, we are out of time. Interesting conversation. I wish I had time to come back, but we got to close it out here. Steve Grumbine is a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. Go check those orgs out. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back tomorrow, folks. Signing off, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. Guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We've had a few technical difficulties with the show today, but the computer eventually acted right. I got a new one. My other computer kept going through these updates, and when it went through the update, the entire thing would basically shut down. And it would do so almost randomly, where you couldn't necessarily stop it or control it. So clearly, you can't necessarily use that for a show. And so I got another one, another computer. It's supposed to be up to snuff. It's supposed to be what I need. That thing runs extremely well. And then all of a sudden, everything freezes. The internet drops. Like, all of it just hit the skids. I had to restart it. When I restarted, everything worked fine. Aggravating, but it's a new system being broken in. Everything seems to work fine. Everything, all the bells and whistles seem to be intact. So there's that part. Look, guys, again, thank you for joining us. We had a really interesting show today. Steve Grumbine is always a fascinating cat, especially with the MMT angle and perspective that he takes on this stuff. And look, I agree with him. I think he's absolutely right. That jobs guarantee can be transformational. When Joe Biden was hugging that woman, what if that woman knew, just as a principle of being an American, that she has a job, or that a job would be available to her? And it's not like we don't have those jobs. Healthcare is a job. Somebody sitting with relatives and whatnot, that's a job. My mom used to have to sit with my grandmother. Now, yes, that's my grandmother. By the same token, if she's sitting with her, that means that she is not doing some other job or task that she needs to be doing in order to provide for herself. In that specific situation, you had my uncle who would try to help. You would have my aunt who tried to help. All of those people, still late into age, worked. Because they had to. Because they were poor their entire life. My aunt, yesterday, I made the point, was eating in a food bank. And so it's like, you find that stuff out, and that stuff is dispiriting. And it wasn't out of magic. It was because the job that she did her entire life paid bupkis. And my mom, same thing. The job she did her entire life paid bupkis. She worked a job for like 20 years and ended up with $13 or $14 an hour, which gives you an idea on how much she was getting paid when she first took that job. I am making the point that there are all sorts of people all throughout the United States that are working jobs that are not paying them well. And jobs at Walmart, for example, end up needing the government to subsidize to pay for many of those workers. Yeah, this corporate welfare needs to stop. Those companies have the ability to pay for themselves. They should pay for themselves. And if they can't afford to pay somebody a minimum wage, maybe they should not be in existence. And if we're going to go with this argument that paying employees less allows for more jobs, then at that point, you should get rid of the minimum wage entirely. No, the minimum wage should be up at least $20-something, $15, just like the $50,000 off student loans is a compromise, period. And Joe Biden should have been willing to go to the mat to get that across the finish line. It's problematic that he didn't. And yeah, I do think that's going to haunt him if he doesn't get that pass. When people start looking around saying, what did he do and did he fulfill his promises? That was a big one. And that you had the capacity to do. You just had to kick some ass in regards to some of the people that are in your party and be willing to go to the mat in order to get that thing accomplished. You weren't willing to do it. So just remember, you weren't willing to do it. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you guys a little bit later.